All right, good evening, everyone. I'd like to call this committee, the whole meeting of the Arlington Heights Village Board to order on Monday, February 22nd, 2021. We're meeting virtually again tonight because it is still not practical or prudent to meet in person. The first item on the agenda is the Pledge of Allegiance, and so I would ask you all to join the Village Board in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge
allegiance
to
to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Would the clerk please call the roll?
Sure. Trustee Baldino,
Here.
Trustee Canty,
Here.
Trustee LaBedz,
Here.
Trustee Padovani,
Here.
Trustee Rosenberg,
Here.
Trustee Scaletta,
Here.
Trustee Schwingbeck,
Here.
Trustee Tinaglia,
Here.
President Hayes.
Yes, here. Thank you all for joining us tonight. We have just one item on the agenda tonight, of course. That's the report from our consultant, the Kaleidoscope Group on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I see we do have about 30 members of the public who have chosen to join us tonight. We welcome you and thank you for joining us for a report on what is another significant, concrete, proactive step forward in our ongoing diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts here in the village of Arlington Heights. I want to thank in advance the Kaleidoscope team and all the great work that they've done over the past number of months in preparing this report and getting us to this point in our ongoing efforts. I also want to thank our village staff and all the employees for their participation in the surveys and interviews and everything that has been ongoing as part of this report and effort. And then finally, I want to thank our residents for their participation in this process as well. We've got a very engaged electorate out there, and we thank them a great deal in terms of their cooperation, their participation, and their inclusion in these efforts as well. I know we had a number of residents participate in our listening sessions and in the town hall. And so it really is a team effort. We try to do everything on a team approach here in the village. And so we can't thank everyone involved in this effort enough to get us to this point in our DEI efforts. I just want to address two issues that have come forward, at least to me, over the past couple of months in terms of our DEI efforts. And just to address those concerns, the first had to do with costs going forward in our DEI efforts. And we certainly have spent money on a consultant. I think it's very worthwhile and money well spent, but we don't anticipate any great deal of fund expenditures going forward in terms of the implementation of any of the recommendations that we might follow either from the report or that we might decide to implement on our own. These are all common sense recommendations that I think would require very little expenditure going forward. And then the other issue that has come up to me is with respect to possible racial hiring quotas. And we're certainly not going to do that. As was pointed out in the Kaleidoscope report, the focus is on selecting the best candidates for a position, irrespective of race. At the same time, we're going to ensure that all recruitment strategies are sufficiently broad, that they reach diverse populations throughout the region, and when appropriate, such as for higher level or leadership positions, we will consider a national search strategy. So I just wanted to address those two areas of concern that I've seen in the past couple of months. I know we'll be talking about some others as well as we go through this evening and in the weeks and months ahead. But with that short introduction, I want to turn it over to our village manager, Randy Recklows. Randy?
Thank you, Mayor. I too would like to start by acknowledging the enthusiasm and work that many members of our community have put in over the past several months on these issues. their work and advocacy really helped focus our own, and I just wanted to acknowledge that. I know personally, I've learned a lot over the past few months from conversations with individuals who are outside of the majority in one way or another on how they experience Arlington Heights and the village government differently than I do. And that has been very helpful for me. And I'm hopeful that these conversations continue going forward and that more venues for these discussions are created through this process. I also want to thank Mary Rath, our Director of HR, who has done a great many things over this past year, not the least of which included maintaining a short-staffed village workforce during a pandemic. She also coordinated this important effort for the past several months. She's kept all the balls in the air and kept all of us internally focused on the task at hand and on deadline during a very challenging time for our organizations. And I know that that has not been easy as well. Back in 2019, the Village Board made embracing diversity and inclusion one of the village's strategic priorities for this period. In early 2020, the DEI audit and plan was one of the projects that was identified and assigned to be completed during this cycle. Other projects, such as our ongoing effort to increase the number of minority and female police officer candidates, implicit bias training for all employees, the identification and prioritization of multilingual employees, and our disabilities employment assessment project, and others, were also part of this effort. It's important to say that issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion in Arlington Heights go far beyond the village government's scope of work. These issues touch every local taxing body, every local organization, and every neighborhood. And by their nature, these issues are ones that require all of us to begin by looking in the mirror to address them. They're not issues that any one organization, village ordinance, or village committee can conclusively solve. So where do we start? Where does the village start? That's the question that we asked ourselves when the village board identified this issue in our planning session a couple of summers ago. And the village government chose to start by first taking a thorough look at ourselves as an employer and as a service provider, as those are the areas over which we have the most control. So when we put out our request for proposals last summer, that is what we kept in mind when we were looking for a firm and ultimately selected Kaleidoscope. It's important to note and reiterate that Kaleidoscope was not tasked with performing a comprehensive community engagement and outreach effort on these issues. Much of that work will come later. It was to get us started by looking at ourselves as an organization. Tonight, we're going to hear from Kaleidoscope on their findings. After their presentation, I'll have a few more comments on the path forward from a staff perspective. We obviously want to get board feedback and feedback from the public on the issues identified. We would like to get a motion from the board on the draft diversity, equity, and inclusion statement that was part of the report on page 35. But beyond that, we are not requesting any other board action this evening. We want to make sure that everyone has enough time to process this information. And based on the feedback we received tonight, staff will develop an action plan that takes into account the village's overall current workloads and projects, the feedback received, and we will offer some alternatives for the village board to consider on ways to approach these issues at a later meeting. But with that, I would like to introduce Tanya Settles and Jesse Lee from Kaleidoscope.
Well, this is Tanya Settles, and I'm going to turn my camera back on so I can see everyone. I want to thank Mayor Hayes, the Board of Trustees, Village Manager Randy Recklouse, Mary Rath, who was always a constant partner for us in this entire process, and of course the community and the staff of the Village of Arlington Heights. We're so grateful to have had the opportunity to join with you, to learn from you, and to present this final report. And as the village manager mentioned to you, this is not an endpoint for the Village of Arlington Heights. This really is a beginning and part of a significant long-range project that they've engaged on long before we started, and that I look forward to seeing them continue in the future. I am joined here tonight by my colleague from the Kaleidoscope Group, Jesse Lee. But I get to have the privilege of taking you through what our findings were, how we got to those findings, and our recommendations for the Village of Arlington Heights as we move forward. So with that, if it's all right with everyone, I'd like to go ahead and start sharing my screen so that you can see the presentation. And if I have selected the right screen, you should be able to see a large purple slide right now. Does that sound about right to everyone?
Yep, we got it.
That is great. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. Just to give you an idea, this is a high-level overview. I know that the Board of Trustees and the Mayor have all had the opportunity to read the report before this presentation, and I know that it's also available to the community, which I'm grateful for. Thank you to the village for sharing that information. So we'll go past the agenda slide, and I'd like to start with just what our scope was exactly, because there has been some some questions about what is it that the Kaleidoscope Group is doing exactly. And our work really was, as the village manager explained, part of an overall investment in enhancing diversity and inclusion, with the end goal of creating and supporting and enhancing a welcoming community for everyone in Arlington Heights. So specifically what we did was look at a baseline assessment of policies and procedures. We conducted a number of opportunities to interact with and learn from the community, including listening sessions and a town hall event. And then we conducted a workforce assessment that included both a series of focus groups with a variety of employees, as well as a survey that about 25% of the workforce participated in. In that sense, our methods were both qualitative and quantitative, and it resulted in a significant amount of data that we then broke apart, we coded and analyzed in a variety of ways that resulted in the findings that are located in the report that you've seen. So those findings really focus on these bullet points that are opportunities to achieve parity in diversity between the community and the village government, a recognition that diversity and inclusion is and has been for a number of years a key strategic priority for the village. And we've identified some opportunities for the village to more fully integrate diversity and inclusion into their policy structure, as well as the general operations of village government. We also looked at opportunities to achieve accountability and strengthen partnerships with the community. Finally, the last couple of points is that we recognize that there are still some opportunities for the village to engage in increased outreach to the community in a number of areas of service. And we did identify, when we looked more closely at the workforce, what some of those gender identity and respectfulness issues may still occur within the workforce of the village staff. All in all, everything that we've done in this presentation is done with the goal of promoting the end objective of a welcoming community for everyone in Arlington Heights. So the slide that you're looking at now looks at that relationship about parity between the community of Arlington Heights and village government. And it's not a surprise to anyone that demographically the village of Arlington Heights is primarily identified as white alone, but that doesn't mean that it isn't diverse. And it doesn't mean that it isn't welcoming to people who have different experiences and cultures and perspectives. There actually are a couple of key demographic features that we noticed that don't come out in just these slides. And one of them is that the population of people who identify as Asian is the largest non-white demographic group in the village, and the census estimates we looked at the American population survey estimates because 2020 census data still aren't available and probably won't be available until the fall of this year. But one of the things that we noticed is that the Asian population has continually and steadily grown over the past number of years in Arlington Heights. And it appears that this trend will continue, and I won't be surprised if you see this result when you see the 2020 census. The other area that we found really interesting is that about 20% of Arlington Heights community members, are foreign born as compared to 14% in the overall state of Illinois. And similarly, the percentage of US citizenship in Arlington Heights hovers around 91.6%, and that's lower than the average, the national average rather, of about 93%. And so one of the things that really struck us is that Arlington Heights is a very diverse place to live, as is all of Cook County. One of the key objectives in our work was to take a look at the policy structure and the guidance. And enhancing diversity and inclusion is a significant part of the village's strategic plan. It's noted in the strategic plan through 2021, and we identified some opportunities to integrate this into existing policies and practices that are related to connecting diversity and inclusion, or D&I, as you saw it abbreviated throughout the report and through the rest of this presentation. Connecting D&I to performance evaluations for leaders and for staff. Engaging in more strategic recruitment, continue the development of strategic recruitment processes. We were struck that the village already does a great deal in terms of casting that wide net that we talked about in our report to attract a more diverse applicant pool. And we've offered some additional support to help achieve that objective. The other area that we looked at was connecting the links between measurement of goals and objectives and performance measures to diversity and inclusion, and relating those back to attracting a greater and more diverse applicant pool for the village as it moves forward with new positions in the future. So the slide that you see in front of us actually is the ICO, the Infrastructure, Competency, and Outcomes Model. This is a kaleidoscope way of looking at things where we connect the basis of the infrastructure, and I don't mean infrastructure necessarily like roads and bridges and highways and those assets. What I mean is the infrastructure of government, or those policies, processes, systems, and initiatives that you have. Make sure the first step in employing this is to make sure that all of the infrastructure, those processes and systems, are developed in a way that focus on inclusivity and welcomeness. And once that's achieved, then the village is better positioned to focus on competency. Competency requires the active involvement and participation of the community and the workforce to create a culturally competent environment that also supports a welcoming community. And finally, outcome. And outcome is important to all of us who work in government. We're very focused on, are we doing what we are supposed to do? Are we doing it in the most effective, efficient, and equitable way we can? So the final stage of the ICO measurement model connects those tangible results that we can measure, that produces in the end that meaningful accountability that needs to exist, and to a very large extent we found does exist between the government and the community that the government of Arlington Heights serves. One of the areas that we looked at in a little bit more depth actually related to public safety, and there were a couple of reasons for this. It wasn't one of the initial plans of this project, but the national conversation around diversity and inclusion focuses a lot right now on law enforcement in particular, but in public safety in general. And we also recognize that the way that most people interact with their government is actually through, usually, law enforcement. In fact, nationwide, about 20% of people across the country, the only contact, the only face-to-face contact that they have with their local government is actually through the police department, and to a lesser extent, the fire department. So we're really excited and proud of the work that the Arlington Heights Police Department and the Arlington Heights Fire Department has done to treat the community in a very respectful and equitable way. Though one of the things that we heard in our listening sessions and the town hall with the community members is that there are some community members who express this sentiment that they'd like to see more people who look like them. But we also want to make sure that everyone is aware that the Arlington Heights Police Department has been very proactive and has engaged in a lot of policy changes that really reinforce those best practices that are related to fair and impartial policing. And in fact, the Arlington Heights Police Department not only follows the best practices in the state of Illinois, they helped create them. And that's something that's really important, I think, for the community to know about the Arlington Heights Police Department. With that said, we also identified that there are some opportunities to help reinforce that proactive policy as it relates to establishing community norms that are related to public safety. And one of these areas is in profiling by proxy. Generally speaking, profiling by proxy refers to those situations where community members call for police assistance, usually police assistance, to report what they perceive as being a crime, when in fact the behavior is normal, it's everyday, and it's completely within the boundaries of what's legal. And we've seen a lot of these incidents across the country of profiling by proxy. And a good example is the recent incident in Central Park in New York City, where a woman was walking her dog. An African-American man asked her to put her dog back on a leash and restrain her dog. And then she called the police and said that the African-American man was threatening her. And we've all seen that in the paper. Or in the news, and I think it came up again a couple of weeks ago. But this is an example of profiling by proxy, where community members will call the police to report behavior that's dangerous for the police department. And we've seen some other areas across the country where those change, where councils have engaged in proactive policy to help control profiling by proxy and stop it as a matter of establishing a community norm. And that's just one of those examples where there are some opportunities for the village to consider as it moves forward related to infrastructure and service improvement areas. We also want to mention that some specific infrastructure areas are and infrastructure, and this time I mean actual infrastructure like roads and bridges and walking paths and water mains are already well underway. And we found that the village really employs a very precise and well-recognized evidence-based decision-making model. And so those decisions about which areas receive improvement and which may unfortunately become deprioritized or pushed a little bit further down the list are made in those practices that are deeply rooted in evidence-based decision. They're not made emotionally, they're not made randomly, they're made with good, solid decision-making that's recognized by municipal governments across the country. With that, though, we know that there's also some opportunities for improved community partnership related to how those projects are prioritized and how residents may be engaged in the decision-making process. So with all of that information to think about, we issued about precisely nine recommendations that are related to policies and processes that focus on the general areas of enhanced engagement and outreach with the community, integration of diversity and inclusion objectives into the policy structure, and consideration of proactive decision-making. And I'm going to go through these recommendations a little bit more specifically because they really do make up the meat of what we talked about in this report. So recommendation number one is to develop and implement a strategy for a more diverse and inclusive recruitment process so that you are able to attract a broad and highly skilled and competent employment pool. Exactly as Mayor Hayes mentioned, that we do not, and I'll reiterate, we do not recommend diversity hiring quotas, but we do recommend casting a wide net so that you're sure to attract the most talented people that you can to work in this remarkable community. We also recommend setting benchmarks and continually adjusting that benchmark as the demographics within the community change, and they will. The second recommendation is to designate diversity and inclusion as a performance management requirement for work plans and as a basis or at least part of the evaluation process for village leaders, as well as for as well as for members of the workforce. A third recommendation focuses on integrating diversity and inclusion as ratable performance objectives. We notice that performance objectives within the workforce are by occupational groups and by supervisors. And so recommendations 2 and 3 really go hand in hand to make sure that everyone who works within the Village of Arlington Heights government recognizes and engages in behaviors that promote inclusion and welcomeness throughout the community. The fourth recommendation and the fifth recommendation also go hand in hand. These are recommendations to the Board of Trustees to maybe think about exploring the feasibility of enacting proactive policy that prohibits or otherwise provides legal remedy for those bias-based non-criminal calls for public services. And in doing that, be sure to engage with the community and seek their active participation so that the community has a voice in the policy-making process within the Village of Arlington Heights. The sixth recommendation is to engage in a community public service campaign. So we all heard about this after September 11th, the public service campaign that said, if you see something, say something. And that was very effective. But the Vera Institute, and we're in agreement at Kaleidoscope, maybe we should be a little bit more specific. And the Vera Institute recommends language like, if you see something suspicious, say something specific, so that when members of the community have a legitimate need for police service that they learn through this public service communication campaign to be able to articulate what exactly is suspicious about the behavior that they're witnessing and ask in a very clear and calm and unbiased way, or to the extent that they can, of the service that they need in order to remedy their situation. And for the village, for the board and for the village government, if you need additional resources, I'm happy to provide those to you based on the Vera Institute's original research. The next three recommendations include communications and developing an online format for the city website so that community members have enhanced opportunities to engage in communication. So we'd like to point out that the communication structure of the village website is actually very robust. But we're always looking for new ways to create avenues of communication and collaboration between the community and the village. And I think we've all become much more adept at using virtual technology and online technology as we've learned about how to manage during this pandemic. We also recommend creating an online format for filing complaints related to the police department that includes an overview, and this information is also available through the village website related to the standard operating procedures about specifically the internal affairs process. This information minimally should include details about what the investigation process is so that community members know what to expect in terms of response. How long will it take someone to get back to me? Are there circumstances where someone might not get back to me? And one of those circumstances is the development of an option to file an anonymous complaint with an explanation of what the limitations might be when complaints are anonymous. But we do want people to feel like they can communicate with the police department and with the village government when they have significant concerns and know that those concerns will be addressed. Finally, the ninth recommendation is to develop an outreach strategy for the community to solicit their active involvement and engagement from residents, including a blend of renters and homeowners, to be used in prioritizing and decision-making those public works and infrastructure improvement projects. In particular, based on the feedback that we received from the community members, we recommend that the village is particularly attentive to the inclusion of lower income neighborhoods, including improving community needs related to things like maintenance of walkways, water mains in older neighborhoods, and lead reduction in the water supply. The next area that we explored with the village of Arlington Heights was the organizational culture and the climate. And this is where we collected data through those focus groups that I mentioned and the survey of the full workforce. Everyone who works at the village of Arlington Heights government was invited to participate in one or both of these activities. And what we found is that most members of the workforce feel very welcome, and they believe that this effort, the diversity, equity, and inclusion climate is comfortable, but there are a few who perceive discrimination, and the people who are most likely to report concerns about discrimination, we found were tied to age and gender related to their personal experiences. And a small proportion, 10% of employees, believe that Arlington Heights is biased based on race or ethnicity. We also were very happy to find that most of the staff members are embracing the work that the village is doing related to diversity and inclusion, and they perceive the village to be a respectful and welcoming place. But there are some opportunities for improvement related to enhancing cultural competency training for those professional and occupational groups that work most closely with the community. And once we understood more about what the demographics are as reported to the Census Bureau and how those demographics are changing, and of course, we need to get more information when the 2020 census is released. That should have been released on April 1st. It's been pushed until much later in the year, possibly as early September, but the data will come, and pay attention to those data as you see them, because they'll help you make decisions about where cultural competency training may best benefit the village. One of the areas of concern that we found in looking at the workforce related to the experiences of women at work, and some female employees described experiences or perceptions or instances about bias against women. And we heard this in focus groups and private conversations and interviews, but we also noticed indicators in the survey results that women may be more likely to experience bias than men within the staff, or among the staff rather, at the village of Arlington Heights. And we did find a strong statistically significant relationship between birth sex, gender identity, and perceptions of whether the climate is perceived as being respectful for women. So nearly 20% of employees who identified as being a woman reported that they strongly or they somewhat agree that they've been discriminated against because of their gender, as compared to slightly under 3% of men. And so it's a pretty significant difference there. Now, it's important to keep in mind that participation rates for this survey were robust and statistically valid at 25%. However, this was not 100% of the workforce. So there may be some occurrences of self-selection bias, and that means that people who had negative experiences within the workforce might feel more compelled to participate than those who didn't, which is always something that can happen when you're doing survey data. And but we believe, though, based on these results, that the village might benefit from a deeper dive as to what is causing this perception among the workforce. So knowing those things about the workforce within the village of Arlington Heights, we offered two specific recommendations related to climate and culture. One is to Consider proactive strategies to neutralize what may be perceived by women and other employees who identify as female to be a less than welcoming work environment as compared to male counterparts. And along these lines, we also recommend considering updating the policy statements related to harassment and discrimination to include language about bullying, disrespectful, or dismissive behavior. The other recommendation is to consider developing and adopting a respectful workplace principles statement. And so this statement of principles emphasizes how the Village of Arlington Heights defines respect. One option might be to define respect as being treated honestly and professionally, with each person's talents, backgrounds, and perspectives being valued. And then in the same document or the same statement, emphasize that Arlington Heights is a place where all employees can do their best to reach optimal results for the community and are confident that those concerns about workplace conduct can be reported without fear of retaliation or reprisal. So it's taking currently existing policy that's already in place and is already enforced by the village, and pushing it maybe just a tiny bit further so that we capture all of those behaviors that can happen in any work environment related to disrespect or bullying or dismissive behavior. So the last area that we looked at was about community and village culture. And we had a lot of opportunities to engage with community members, and we're grateful for every one of those opportunities. But we have to recognize that our scope of work was a little bit, it was a little bit restricted because this was a broad overview. And I know that we had community members who wanted to become more involved and we recognize that we may not have had the opportunity to include all perspectives. Arlington Heights is a fairly large community. There are, I believe, and I'll bet someone will help me here, but I think there are 73 to 78,000 people who live in Arlington. Yeah, they're somewhere in there. There's a lot of people with a lot of different experiences and ideas about how to make it an even greater place to live and work than it already is. We did identify a few key issues. One is that community members did share with us that they have concerns about proportionate representation, or that issue about parity between the demographic characteristics of Arlington Heights, the Arlington Heights community, as compared to the workforce. And we talked about that a few minutes ago. We also are aware that there are some pejorative or less than nice, I guess, characterizations of the village as related to socioeconomic factors and race. And we also learned that community members really want greater effort from the village and village government in terms of inclusion, particularly around holiday celebrations. Interestingly, that was an issue that came up in both of the listening sessions, is the issue around holiday celebrations. And I have every ounce of confidence that community members will continue to share that perspective with the board and with the village government. The last point here is that this is a community that is really eager and willing to make the investment to partner with the village and leverage those contributions that individuals throughout the community have that support that welcoming vision for village life. We enjoyed and learned greatly from all of those interactions. And my hope is that the community members see that we did hear you, we listened to you, and we shared those concerns with with village leadership and with the Board of Trustees. You did not go unheard, and I hope that we did you respect in these recommendations, actually, that are on the slide in front of you. So we have two additional recommendations that are related to supporting. I take that back. There's actually a number of recommendations. There's about 4 that are related to supporting village culture. The first one is, in addition to the managing bias training that the village has invested in, that actually was underway when we came on board to do our part of this project, we also recommend that the village consider investment in cultural competency education for those professional groups that are most likely to come into contact with community members. So that's, of course, the police and the fire department, but it also includes, for example, public works. Anybody who interacts with the community may benefit from cultural competency training. It is related to, but it is actually different from bias management training. And this is a recommendation that we heard a number of times in our conversations with village staff, that they would like to know more about the diverse backgrounds of the community so that they are able to engage in a more culturally relevant, respectful, and efficient way. The next recommendation is to, as the budget allows, and this is a tough time for government, but keep it in mind that as you consider seeking employees or those positions open, look for employees who have language ability that aligns with communities where English is not the first language, for example. We know now that there is a growing Indian population where Hindi is the most commonly spoken language. And so there may be benefit to the village to have people on staff who are able to converse and communicate effectively with that population of people in the village who speak Hindi. Recommendation number 14 is to include as part of the strategic planning process, recruiting community members who represent those diverse populations within the village to make sure that you're making decisions that are based on multiple perspectives and that you're taking into consideration what the needs are of different people across the village in terms of service delivery and policy making. So one approach might be, for example, for the board to consider establishing a short-term ad hoc committee that consists of community members, businesses, and civic leaders to work directly and collaboratively with the village to help identify those key priorities and focus on what those high ticket, high value, high need items are, and support the village in prioritizing those work plans for services as they move forward. Recommendation 15 is for the village to consider establishing community-focused workshops that are on topics of interest to the community that are related to government services and initiatives. And we recommend a strategic community outreach program that emphasizes respectful engagement and respectful communication between the community and government, with the end goal of more closely bridging that gap of any perceptions that the community and the village are not together as they move toward integrating with one another and partnering with one another to achieve the end goal of a welcoming community for all. So the last thing I'll go over very, very quickly, those are the key findings from our recommendations based on the assessment that we were able to conduct. And it was an honor and a privilege of ours. It is definitely one of my favorite projects that I've had the opportunity to work with. We also wanted to leave you with a strategic plan. So what you see in front of you is, for a reason, structured like a house. A strategic plan is a lot like a house. So at the top of the house, we're asking the village to consider, what does DEI look like if it works exactly the way we want it to? If it's operating ideally, what does that be? And that's your goal of where you want to land. And then ask, how do we focus? How do we make the case for change? And how does this make us better? So we recommend looking at 5 different strategic areas of focus, from workforce to culture, creating unity, because ultimately unity is the goal. We want unity between the village and the community, focusing on the needs of the community and other government partners, because one of the things that I've learned about working more in Illinois is that government is complicated there, and it is particularly complicated in Cook County, and there are many government partners. It is a unique entity in Cook County as compared to many other places across the nation. And I consider myself very lucky to have the opportunity to work in such a dynamic and complex environment. We also tied and recommend tying, as we have throughout the report, measures of success. We continually emphasizing measurement and charting success and keeping track of where it is so that if success changes, you know where those changes are happening and how to adjust them as you go. Finally, the House looks at what are the keys to sustainable change. And one of the things that we learned from working in Arlington Heights is that those keys to change are tied to communication, to education, and to accountability. So this very last slide recommends some areas for the board and for the community and for village government to think about as they look toward strategic planning goals for 2021. Focus on meaningful impact through empowerment, bridging that gap between the community and the government, if it exists at all, and finding ways to make sure that community members are empowered to communicate with and seek change from their government. Also, we also recommend that the village may want to consider leadership alignment and visioning, which is the process that brings the village leaders together with one another so that they have a shared vision of what success looks like for the future. Though I have to tell you, after spending so many months in Arlington Heights, I believe that by and large, there is a lot of alignment related to the vision. I hear the board and the village government and the village manager and the community all together moving in the same direction. We also recommend enhancing baseline measurements, focusing on strategic goal setting, and reassessment and revisioning as you continue to refine and improve this process. So with that, I would like to ask the board if they have any questions, and I'm going to turn this presentation off so that I can see you.
Well, Tanya, thank you for that very honest, fair, unbiased, and comprehensive report. And feel free to take a drink of water. That was a lot of talking. And
thank you.
And so we can't thank you enough again for this very comprehensive report that's giving us a lot to consider as we move forward in this very important effort. Before we go to the board for questions, I know Mr. Reckloss wanted to talk a little bit about where we are at in the process going forward and some other items before we take comments and questions. So Randy.
Thank you, Mayor. And thank you, Tanya. So, one of the questions is, so where do we go from here? The village, while serving in a leadership role in the community, are not the only leaders in the community. And we do not have the only leaders elected by this community. Staff has kept this in mind, and we've been having some very preliminary discussions with our counterparts and our sister agencies with the school districts, park district, and library over the past few months about DEI issues in Arlington Heights. And obviously the village brings a lot of important capabilities to the community and provides a variety of important services to our residents. But, for example, the village government could never approach the Arlington Heights Memorial Library's reach or capabilities in facilitating discussions on important social and cultural issues in a broad sense, nor should we. That traditionally has been part of the role that the community has conveyed upon them, and they are well equipped for that. They have hosted a number of thought-provoking forums for community members to engage in recent years and on these topics. Moreover, the village government will never have the intimate understanding of the day-to-day needs and experiences of families with children that our school districts have. That is what they bring to the table. We all have our own part to play, but as we discuss this, I think it's important to understand that the village, nor any potential body of the village, has the capability or authority to address all aspects of DEI in Arlington Heights, or to direct the work of other agencies or community organizations as we discuss a path forward. All of our sister agencies have begun discussing and addressing these issues in Arlington Heights in their own ways in recent years. And on the occasions where we have worked together, I believe we've done some of our best work. Much of the work that we do going forward on DEI has to be in the intergovernmental space between our leadership teams so we can more effectively coordinate our efforts to maximize their impacts on the community as a whole. I just want to make that point that, this very much from staff perspective needs to be a team effort with all the government agencies, because it's something that really transcends, each of our individual roles as a community. With that being said, I did want to quickly address some of the key recommendations from a staff's perspective on a way forward. Again, we're not looking for formal direction on these issues, but these are just some food for thought. Let's see here. Oops. So first, in terms of the diverse and inclusive recruitment, while staff has made some advances in recent years in this area, including expanded recruitment at diversity job fairs, recruitment visits at city colleges, the upcoming disability recruitment review, and the creation of the Southwest Suburban Police Recruitment Task Force, staff agrees that more partnerships are going to have to be made, with specific emphasis on those groups within the community that are underrepresented in our workforce, so we can ensure the greatest number of candidates for open positions are present. In terms of recommendations 2 and 3, they're kind of related. The integration of DEI into performance measurement and evaluations. We think this is one that can be done relatively quickly. This is a concept that can be researched and developed by staff. Staff can seek out and expand upon industry examples about how to better integrate and measure DEI into regular performance measurement. This is one item we can do internally, because we can modify our own performance evaluation instruments, and that's something that process is coming up soon, and it's something we can talk about quickly. Items 4, 5, and 6 were profiling by proxy. This was a concept that I had never heard termed in that way until this report, and so we've been learning a lot about this stuff as we go. Staff will do some analysis to determine the presence of these types of calls within the police department, and include an examination of this phenomenon when conducting broader outreach in the community. And after the conclusion of that research, we can give the village board some alternatives on how to explore, how to address and or help prevent this type of profiling, which might include a possible public information campaign, as Tanya had indicated. We do want to be thoughtful about this one. We want to make sure that while we want to prevent profiling by proxy, we certainly don't want to do anything that would discourage residents from calling the police when they do see something suspicious. And so this one will take some careful thought and work. Public complaint processes and public input. Staff obviously can review the current complaint procedures for police and non-police issues alike, based on feedback, and ensure that they're as clear, transparent, and as simple as they should be. In some cases, there are legal requirements, particularly for sworn police complaints, that must be taken into consideration as well. Community outreach. This was really one of the key findings and key themes, I think, as we went through this process and really did our own soul searching, was that more and more effective outreach needs to occur, especially with those folks in our community who may not feel as comfortable for some reason or another calling or emailing Village Hall when a problem occurs. We've all observed this phenomenon. Some people are just not comfortable calling us with complaints, even when they have real issues. Some residents call Village Hall almost daily, or they may even call elected officials almost daily. Others, for cultural or other reasons, would never think to. In some cases, they may be recent immigrants and they come from countries where the government is not your friend. And I think we all need to acknowledge that this is the case, and we need to think of more proactive ways to reach folks so that everyone has an equal voice. This will mean that the squeaky wheel will not always get the grease, and that requires a change in mindset for all of us, including senior staff and probably the elected officials as well. We can develop a detailed ongoing strategy to better conduct more consistent outreach, and in doing so both on a geographic basis and a demographic basis, in understanding that different people can best be reached in different ways. And that's something that's going to take some work on our part. Based on past experience, we also think that outreach can be done well in tandem with our sister agencies. Sometimes school districts, the park district and the library have different ways of reaching folks that we don't, and vice versa. We think that there's some opportunities to work together in this one. Creating a more welcoming work environment. We're looking at a lot of different ways to tackle some of the issues that were identified in the surveys. We are going to create some internal employee work groups to further explore the survey. We are looking at additional training and policies and engagement on these issues. Tanya and her team are going to be making a presentation to our senior staff group in the next couple of weeks to talk about these issues specifically. And I think it's fair to say that this employee survey data really needs to be taken seriously. Whenever people take a risk to provide us honest feedback, I think we really have an obligation and a duty to honor that by taking it seriously. And looking at the workforce was obviously a key purpose of this study, and so it's something that needs to be our focus going forward. In terms of the workplace principle statement, this is something we can work on and try to identify samples of. Almost all the policies that we write are telling employees what they shouldn't be doing. They're always kind of written in the negative. Don't do this, don't do that. And I think there's some real value to writing a policy statement that talks about what behaviors are encouraged and what we want them to be doing. Cultural competency training is obviously something that we can explore, and there's a lot of avenues for that, and that's something we can do research on. Seeking language ability that matches our demographics. As we've mentioned in previous meetings, we have done some extra work to identify folks in our organization that are multilingual. And we have about 52 employees that are fluent in 18 different languages within the organization. But what we can do next, as Kaleidoscope recommended, was that I really focus those efforts on where the gap exists between our workforce and our community. And that's something that will take some additional work. Participation of community members into the process. Anytime you're engaging in an exercise in inclusion, how you include people is obviously a key part of that. There are a lot of ways we can look at this issue. We want to make sure that all our residents and employees are involved in decision-making on an ongoing basis in a meaningful way, and that all of our residents have access to all the services that we provide. But there's a lot of ways we could go with this, and we really want to do some research. This might involve, as they suggested, an ad hoc steering committee that would include members of the community to help implement and inform some of the outward-facing portions of the plan. We might create, as we discussed, a more formal program of ongoing outreach to different groups and neighborhoods in our community. We might explore forums on topics of interest in the community, partnering with the library or other organizations. It might include the creation of a new village commission or the modification of an existing commission, or the creation of an intergovernmental task force with representatives from community agencies to look at more closely at DEI in our community from each organization's unique perspective. But no matter what we do, one thing I would caution the board is that finding meaningful ways to integrate new voices into the decision-making process for any topic of note really should not be taken lightly. We should not be looking to merely check a box and declare victory. If not implemented well, and I've seen this before, and I know other board members have as well, such creating new systems can lead to greater inefficiencies in our decision making. They could lead to overreach by a village entity into the lane of another government entity, or even worse, sometimes they can even magnify underrepresentation of particular groups within our community. Staff would like to research and analyze some different alternatives for board consideration for discussion at another COW meeting in the near future on this topic. But with that, we appreciate your patience and would like to turn things back over to the board for questions and feedback. One more item I know we can probably get to after the discussion is staff is recommending that the Village Board of Trustees adopt the draft diversity, equity, and inclusion statement at the next Village Board meeting, and we'd be looking for a motion with that recommendation this evening. But with that, I'll turn things back over to you, Mayor. Thank you.
Right. Thanks, Randy, and thank you for that reminder about what the one suggested motion tonight. is with respect to the position statement on DEI, which is found on page 35 of the report. So any comments or questions from the board on that suggested motion would be appreciated as we move forward. So just in terms of where we're going the rest of the evening, I would like to go to the board first for questions or comments, and then we'll go to the audience. And so any questions or comments from the board? Trustee Tinaglia.
Thanks, Mayor Hayes. I think this is a question for Randy. I think Tanya mentioned that 25% of the workforce village employees did answer the survey. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Is there any reason, Tanya or Randy, why we couldn't have expected a higher number of response from that, or participation, I guess is a better word?
I don't know, Tanya, you want to comment on how this goes with other clients or provide some perspectives?
Sure. Yeah, let me do that first, maybe give you some background. The 25% response rate is actually a pretty robust response rate. And particularly when we're asking questions about how welcome do you feel? Is the culture within your organization, you know, the people who send you a paycheck, supportive, inclusive? Do you feel like you've been discriminated against? And so those are some questions that people are sometimes a little bit more hesitant to respond to. We've worked with clients where when we receive fewer than 10% or a 10% participation rate, that we'll start to sort of send gentle nudges to people to increase the participation rate, but we didn't need to do that in this case because the workforce actually participated pretty strongly. We also looked at part of the analysis of the data. We looked to see how the data were distributed for each question. So we looked at things like measures of central tendency and were there big swings one way or another, and could it be explained by the sample? And other than the one finding that we have about women in the workforce, the data were actually pretty normally distributed, and we felt good that the sample was representative of the workforce in general.
If I could add too, and I think there were focus groups conducted as well, and as Tanya said, this isn't the end of our feedback. We're going to take the information we received and dig deeper on this as well. I mean, I think these issues are still issues that some people just aren't comfortable talking about. And I think that we all have to acknowledge that. And I know that's some of the feedback I've received as well, that they are still waiting to see kind of how we're going to deal with these issues in some ways.
Yeah, I understand that. That's unfortunate. I was hoping for better participation than that. I mean, we do a lot of surveys for lots of different things here, as you know, Randy. And if you get 50 or 60%, you think it's a home run. I was just hoping a little more than 25%. But I guess the last question then, is it, and maybe Tanya hinted on this, is it safe to say then that 75% of those other employees then either felt comfortable or something, I mean, that they didn't feel they needed to do that survey?
I'm not sure that you can actually and completely confidently say that. I would maybe interpret it more that when we have a sample response of 25% and people are feeling relatively safe and secure in their positions, when we see a response rate that's a lot lower, we have some concerns. But without knowing what motivated people to either participate in or withdraw from the survey, I don't know that I couldn't, as a statistician, I wouldn't be able to make that statement.
Okay, that's fair. That's fair. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jim. Trustee Rosenberg.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Tanya. Thank you, Jesse, for the work you did. Appreciate everything. And just had a couple questions on your framework section that you had in the report. you had kind of a timeline, steps 1 through 5 or 1 through 6 in there as to what I think you may believe is the time frame of how you want to go about executing the process here. Is that correct, Tanya?
You know, I would look more at that as not an in-stone time frame, because I don't know definitively what your resources look like, what your other projects are, what the other pieces are. It is one option for you, but it's also completely okay to adjust that as you need, depending on you know, any number of factors. You know, government across the board was sort of thrown for a loop last year in 2020. And so what might have normally taken 3 to 6 months or 8 months to complete may actually require more time now, just because things are different and we had to allocate resources differently than we expected. So it's an idea, but not definitive.
If I can, to Trustee Rosenberg, I was going to say, you know, we've had some very preliminary conversations on that, and we are, just to be blunt right now, we're short-staffed. There's a lot of activity still, staff activity in terms of Slack resources, still working on issues related to the pandemic. And we have a couple of other major projects kind of going through the hopper. I think while this is certainly a priority, the board has indicated this is a priority. I have indicated to the organization that this is a priority, and we know that the community feels is a priority. It just isn't the only priority right now, and we have to make sure that whatever we do well. And so some aspects of this we can do quickly, but some of them may take some time. And I just want to make sure that we manage expectations in that regard.
Right. I believe that the process, when and if we decide the time frame, would definitely need to be lengthened, rather than too short of a time frame as potentially recommended, because I think it's going to be a kind of a walk before you run type thing on this, and see how each step goes one at a time until we progress until the next step as far as that goes. So, the whole DEI process that we're going through, I think, is going to be a very long process. It's obviously not a overnight fix here, and I believe that we're working on some of the things before the commission report started, but we still have a long way to go. I don't believe that Arlington Heights will ever be maybe as diverse as people vision it to be, there's a lot of other work that has to be done by other taxing bodies, I believe, also that have a lot of issues also. So this is kind of a combined effort, I think, that every taxing body that kind of affects or touches in the village itself needs to be inclusive on this. And so I think in a lot of times perception is that the village is the sole source for resolving this, and I think we're only a small part of it. So I think we have to get everyone on board with this process and get them to be working just as hard as people would like us to do. So thank you.
All right, thanks, Trustee Rosenberg. Trustee Padovani.
Thank you, Mayor. And I want to say thank you to not only Tanya and Jesse, but to everybody who participated in this DEI assessment, the staff, our village staff, and all the community members that did. I think we've see here a whole lot of really good recommendations that can help make our village better overall. I wanted to just share a few things to reinforce what Tanya said, and it comes from my background when I was Director of Marketing and Patient Relations at the Northwestern Medical Faculty Foundation in Chicago, a 800 physician medical group at the medical school there. I was for 12 years, one of my many responsibilities was to measure patient satisfaction. And when we reached a 25% return rate on our satisfaction surveys, we're ecstatic. But very much like what Tanya was saying, we weren't as comfortable in projecting those results onto an entire population of 1 million patients that we had. What we did was we used the surveys or those results to look for areas that might need improvement and just use that as a starting point. Doesn't mean that there's something exactly as it's explained there. You have to go in and talk to the people or try to assess it much deeper to really understand what's driving those comments. And that's where you'll bring the best results or the best solutions to that. And sometimes it's communication, sometimes it's policy, it goes on from there. I would like to ask, and this might be Randy, it might be Tanya, you said in one of the, I think it was recommendation number 9, really caught my attention, as the need to reduce lead in our water, lead in the water. Randy, I get the quarterly or what is it, annual water reports from our Public Works Department. Do we have any lead problems in the water supply of Arlington Heights?
No, we meet all federal standards. Our water, we do all best practices to eliminate lead. And so, no, we don't have any current issues.
Okay.
I think that was something that was kind of meant as a general, it's something that generally all agencies do in terms of lead mitigation. And, I don't want to speak for Tanya, but I assume as she meant kind of making sure that those practices are consistent across the community.
Yes, that is exactly what I had intended. Excuse me, and my apologies if that wasn't very clear. No, it was not first within the scope of our work to look to determine if there were lead, if there was lead contamination within the water supply. It was intended more for the purposes of the presentation tonight as an illustration of priority setting. Certainly, yes, please let me clarify. No, we did not find any complaints or incidents of inordinate levels of lead within the drinking water supply.
Okay, that's a relief factor for a lot of people, I'm sure. One other question, and this might be kind of broad here for Tanya and even Jesse. When I was doing the patient satisfaction surveys, we used the Press-Ganey group out of Notre Dame, and they had all kinds of different organizations of our type that they do the exact same survey or something very similar. And then they were therefore able to benchmark us against, these were group practices all over the country. Are you able to benchmark Arlington Heights or compare us to other communities?
So we've been conducting this survey. The survey that we conducted for the Village of Arlington Heights is a base survey that we've developed and have been using within Kaleidoscope for about the last 3 years as the it's the core assessment. And then we customize it by adding questions, but there are some data that we have that may allow it. To be really honest with you, though, we've only been collecting and keeping those data for about a 2-year period of time, and not every engagement that we have includes the survey. So, our hope, I understand what you're saying, because that's our hope too, is that we can use that knowledge as the basis for establishing, where clients sit in the future compared to, those survey results from the past. We're not at that point yet. So I would be very hesitant right now. In fact, I would be, this is the analyst in me that is getting very, very nervous. I'm almost ready to break out in a sweat thinking about whether we can actually compare.
Don't worry. The press, just to be honest with you, the Press-Ganey folks, when I started the survey with them, and ours was the first at Northwestern, and then it took about 4 years for them to build up that exact database that you say you want to use as the benchmarking. So when that comes available, that's going to be very, very valuable to see how not only we're doing internally against our previous assessments, but also, I guess, nationwide or regional wide, however you can dice that data.
And that really is where we're hoping to get with it eventually, but it's not a service or a product that we're able to offer right now. But yes, there's a recovering analyst in me that is very excited about the possibility of being able to support our clients in the future by looking at those data. We've just attained the point where we're feeling comfortable with the statistical norming of each of those questions. And that helps too. So when we have smaller sample sizes, we can do some comparisons. We can set some parameters around how statistically valid they are. But I like where you're thinking about that. We are thinking the same thing, I think.
Well, it comes from a lot of experience. Well, thank you very much, Tanya and Jesse, and thank you, Mayor.
Thanks, Greg. Trustee Schwingbeck.
Thank you, Mayor Hayes. Thank you, Tanya and Jesse, and I too would piggyback on the things that my other fellow trustees said. Thanks to the community that participated. Trustee Tinaglia had focused on the 25% of the staff that took the survey, Tanya, and you said that was a good representation. Earlier, we said we had about 78,000 residents in our village. And I know you had the 2 listening groups where the residents were given the opportunity to talk to you. I believe 20 residents in each one of those listening groups. And then we were certainly as trustees on that last group where we had I think a cap of about 100, and we had a little less than that was on the Zoom call. I'd like you to maybe just comment a little bit in the end of your report, and I believe it was on page 30 and 31. So I've had the opportunity to talk to a lot of residents, certainly have received a lot of emails from residents. This is an extremely important issue, not only for us, but our country. I've had the opportunity to talk to many of my fellow trustees as well. I'd like you to just maybe comment on that last paragraph on page 30, and then just the continuation on 31, because I want to make sure we're getting a good representation of our entire village.
So I think that the sections that you're talking about, just to make sure that I'm looking at the right thing, it's the paragraph on page 30 that begins, "In the interest of full disclosure, we believe
Yes.
it's important to note." Okay. So we, these are focus groups and self-selection, and I've mentioned self-selection a little bit earlier today too. We created, to the best of our ability under the circumstances that we had, given the public safety and public health restraints. I mean, we're working in a virtual environment, to invite people from the entire community to participate in these sessions. We did find that in the sessions there's a very active social media component in Arlington Heights, which is great. Particularly in a pandemic. It's the best way to communicate with one another. And we found that we had a good number of concerned and invested and interested community members who participated. And it was a great discussion, and we learned a lot. But one of the things that we had a couple of restrictions too. So one of the things that we found, for example, was that there very possibly are pockets of the community that either could not participate because they didn't have the technology that's available to them, or they tried to register and ran into a registration limit because we limited participation to 30 registered users, because we also wanted to make sure that we heard what people were telling us, and we had some people who didn't attend. So we know that there are other people in the community of Arlington Heights who also are interested in having a voice about what diversity, inclusion, and welcomeness mean to them. In a perfect world, we would have conducted this assessment in person, and I pretty much regret every day that I haven't had the opportunity to do that, because if we had been able to be on ground and on site with you, we would have been able to physically go to those places and find out a little bit more about what the experiences are of that part of the community. And so we relied heavily on those community members who did participate in the town hall and in the focus group sessions to give voice to community members who may not have had it. And it wasn't a perfect assessment. And so I am confident that there are others, and I would, strongly support and encourage the village to create those opportunities for those parts of the community to work with you and partner with you as a government. But we did have, we had some restrictions, partly because of COVID and partly because it's the nature of diversity work. So when we ask people to participate, we either get people who we get people who have an investment one way or another. And sometimes people want change, and they're looking and they want to invest in change and they want to partner with you for change. And then sometimes there are community members who are equally adamant, but that they don't want change. And in a virtual environment, it's sometimes hard to tell the differences between those voices. Does that help answer?
No, it does. I appreciate that. And
Okay.
again, thank you for all the work that you guys did putting this report together. Thank you,
If
man.
if I could just add something to that too. I mean, because this was an issue that came up and, we talked about it quite a bit internally, is that, these focus groups were really designed to kind of provide some initial reconnaissance and kind of, anecdotal information that Kaleidoscope could build upon. They were never intended to be this like scientifically modeled, all encompassing, this is what every group in the community is thinking. And we know that a big part of the work of equity and inclusion is going to be ongoing efforts to do that. But, this was never intended to be that. And when you have a couple of focus groups, that is definitely the downside of it, is that you're never going to get everybody. And there's a lot of people to get, and we're even more severely limited in the midst of a pandemic, but you've just got to have it. Sometimes have to play the hand you've been dealt. But I mean, we're for sure, open to the idea that when we do more outreach, we're going to have more findings that may be different than what we found in this initial assessment. And we'll have to, roll with those punches as we get them.
Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Trustee Schwingbeck. Trustee LaBedz.
Thank you, Mayor Hayes, and thank you, Tanya and Jesse and your team, and Randy and Mary, and for all the work that you've done on this. I thanks to the staff that participated, and especially thanks to the community who have been involved, not just with the focus groups, but also reaching out to us board members, and also the many other things that you are doing here in the community with regards to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I know there are many, many people for whom this is a very important, very passionate subject, and I agree. One comment I wanted to make about the survey results, especially from the staff survey, and I talked to Randy about this a little bit, and I have to say it really jumped out at me that women and those who identify as female really felt it was to me, it looked significant, their comments, that they did not feel that they were as important a part of the staff, and they didn't feel the support. It's been a many decade struggle, and I know that you'll be working on ways to address this thing. This particular issue, as well as the others. And also with respect to people responding or not responding to surveys, sometimes people don't respond because they don't think it's going to make a difference. So, but that this many people did respond, I think is great, because they at least feel that they might make a difference by saying what they had to say and participating. I also appreciate the comments that, that diversity and inclusion is a broad topic and includes, the whole range of differences in people, from race and gender to language and all those many different topics that you brought up, all those different aspects of it. So I appreciate that as being a part of this. And I have one question, Tanya and Jesse, about this. And I'm just curious why, in terms of a commission or something, why you recommend an ad hoc commission as opposed to something else. Not saying one thing one way or another, but I wanted to know your thought process.
You know, I think that that's a great question, and thank you for asking it. Excuse me. But there are actually two reasons why. One is that for this particular part of the welcoming and inclusive project that the village has undertaken, we had a rather limited scope, and so we also wanted to make sure that our recommendations were consistent with the scope of work that we had in front of us, and could be accomplished in a way that didn't, for lack of a, excuse me, for lack of a better term, bust the budget for Arlington Heights. So we had cost effectiveness in mind, and then we had, you know, what is our scope and is this too much reach? The other piece is that we are advocates. We're deep public administration people, both Jesse and I, and we prescribe to, you know, an ethos, maybe I would say an ethos of incrementalism. So making strategic, planned steps in order to achieve a greater objective. And that's why we recommend looking at an ad hoc committee. Now, we're not the deciding body. And if you come to the conclusion that, okay, we need to take this further, by all means, please do. But we wanted to give you a solid starting place where you could start looking at what that partnership between community and government might look like in an incremental way that didn't bust your budget, and started moving you on the path of where you want to be 5 years or 10 years from now.
Okay, thank you for that. And when you mentioned your public administration aspect of it, I couldn't help but think sometimes things get created and they just last forever and ever, and sometimes go past what their intended purpose was. So maybe hey, there's a little bit of that in your concern about that. So
there is, yes.
Okay, thank you very much.
And you can
go ahead.
And you can always change it. So if you find that the ad hoc committee is a great foundation for that partnership between you and the village and the community, you can always make it permanent if you'd like to.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely, and it certainly would be. I'm going to be very interested in the research that Randy is going to be doing and presenting to the board as the different mechanisms that other communities have used, whether it's a permanent commission, whether it's an ad hoc, whether it's some combination, whether, as you mentioned, but you know, whether it's changing current commissions. Basically, everything's on the table. So that's the way I look at it. That's right. Thank you very much. That's all I had.
You're welcome.
Trustee LaBedz. Trustee Baldino.
Thank you, Mayor. And first of all, let me echo my fellow trustees' thanks to the Kaleidoscope Group for the work that you have put into this report and for the presentation that you gave this evening. Thank you to village staff for their participation in the surveys and our community members who participated in the town hall and the focus groups. I would also like to say thank you to Manager Recklaus for his statement that he's going to take the results of these surveys seriously and delve deeper into these things. I think that that's very important, and I, for one, will be very interested to hear how that turns out and what steps we might be taking to mitigate those issues brought up by the survey. So thank you, Randy. I appreciate it. Two questions that I have. The first one comes from page 15 of the report, under the human resources strategies. And it talks about expanding the definition of diversity. And while I certainly sympathize with that strategy, I'm wondering what form that might take, because we're talking about expanding our definition of diversity for recruitment for the village. And it goes on to talk about tracking gender identity, orientation, and ideological perspectives. Those things are very difficult, if not impossible, to track during the recruitment process, because aren't those things that we are forbidden from asking a potential candidate?
Those are data points that you may not be able to access as easily, and we don't recommend anything that would put you in a position of risk in terms of violating, I would say, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 as amended. We certainly wouldn't want you to do that, but what we are trying to recommend is that you take the spirit of what diversity is and not limit yourself to looking at diversity in terms of race and ethnicity, because that tends to be the direction that people are going, particularly right now, and for some very good reasons. And so the recommendation is simply to take a very broad perspective of what constitutes diversity, and you can track those once you understand once the village understands what those performance metrics are and what they're trying to achieve, then they can work backwards from those goals to make sure that they're able to, to find the right data. But no, we are not recommending that you ask people to identify their, anything other than what is legal by any stretch. Does that help answer your question? Yes.
It does, and I appreciate the clarification. Go ahead, Randy.
I was just going to add a little bit to that too. One of the things I think you run up against whenever we're hiring is the kind of like meism, where we all try to hire, you see a bit of yourself in someone, and that makes them an attractive hire or an attractive promotion. They went to the same school, or they grew up in the same town, and I think it's not, this isn't coming from an angry place, and I think when we go through implicit bias training, we need to look at bias both ways, and not just in terms of what we may be biased against, but what we're biased towards, because the whole goal here is realizing that we all have blind spots, and if we hire people that are all exactly alike, you have the same blind spots, and your organization has the blind spot that you have. And I think when we look at these things, we need to just very consciously exclude those things, even when they pop up in an interview and you didn't mean for them to, and being clear that this should be off the table. Or maybe I want someone who thinks a little bit differently than I do, because that'll help us, or someone who's got a little bit different background. And so it's complicated, and I agree. I mean, obviously we're not going to do anything to put ourselves legally at risk, but I think it's, for our folks that are engaged in hiring, I think we just need to really think hard about this stuff. And I think that's how I took that comment.
Okay, thanks. And I agree. It's definitely something that we should be thinking about. It was just that made me a little nervous, the comment there. My other question has to do with recommendation 12. And I realize that we are just in the initial steps of this entire process. And my question may not have an answer yet. But I'm wondering if we have thought about what form the cultural competency education might take, that the village might be getting into in addition to bias training. I am by no means an expert, but my understanding is that competency training, cultural competency training can be pricey. And there's some question as to how effective it can be. I don't think it would hurt, but have we talked at all, or is there any more detail that you can provide on what form that might take?
I don't know if Barry wants to comment on this, but I mean, to my knowledge, I don't think we've done a lot of work identifying alternatives in this space yet. You know, we do have a training budget, and, you know, my thought would be that we would be looking, you know, start evaluating options, talking to some of our peer communities and see organizations that they've used, and it could be something we work into the, you know, budget for next year. But I don't know, Mary, if you have any other thoughts on that.
You know, I just would like to add, you know, Manager Eckhouse, I agree with you. This is something that Trustee Baldino, you know, we've not researched deeply into at this point in time. There's, as we're all aware, in our pandemic, you know, the whole push is towards virtual training, whether we just don't know what it's going to look like at this point in time.
Okay, I kind of suspected that was going to be the answer. This too, I will be following as we move forward. Thank you for all your responses, and thank you, Mick.
Thanks, Trustee Baldino. Trustee Canty.
Thank you. I reiterate my colleagues' comments, thanking the Kaleidoscope Group for their work and the village staff for the work that they put in. I'm going to try and keep this short, but I think everybody knows this is a topic that is extremely near and dear to my heart for very personal reasons. And I think that there is a concern when we go through some of these, some of the studies that you've done and the things that we heard from the town halls and the listening sessions, that there is somehow a vocal minority of people that are driving a push for needing more DEI efforts in this community. And what I think we need to remember is that if they are vocal, that is a huge step. It is hard to be different in the US. It is hard to be different in Arlington Heights. So the fact that there are people that are speaking out, that are asking us to do more and to take this leadership role, I think commands us to take more action. And what I think has gotten somehow missed or maybe overlooked is the fact that we as a board can be very dismissive of comments that people raise when they come to us and they are pushing us to be better than we are today by tomorrow, right? They want a little bit more. They love this village, they believe in this village, and they want us to do better. And I think that our gut reaction can sometimes be, well, we are welcoming, but saying it doesn't make it so. Or we say, we can't force people to move here. And that is technically true, but we can let them know that we want them here and that we desire their presence to be here, and we can actually be welcoming. We can't make businesses pop up here, but I can tell you it is hard to get your hair done as a Black woman in this village. I can tell you that there are not Black-owned restaurants in this village. So we can't boil the ocean. We can't make our community more equitable overnight, but I do think we can take some concrete steps. And I really appreciate, Randy, you and Mary taking the time to say, where is the low-hanging fruit? What can we tackle right now that costs us nothing, but will make such a statement to people in this community that are begging for us to do something? And I say that as somebody who is begging us to do something to make this better for my children, for my friends' children, for the children of people I don't even know that live in this community. It is a wonderful place to live, and there is a lot to be proud of. I have told Chief Pecora on our board meetings in front of the world that our training of our police officers is second to none, and he should bottle it and he should sell it. He should find a way to make money off of the training and the culture that they have in our police department. They are wonderful, but there are not enough members of that team that aren't white men. So while I appreciate that we got a 25% response rate from the employees, And that is great. It sounds to me, Jesse and Tanya, that is a really good response rate. But what is left out when people are asking about, well, what about the other 75%? The majority of our staff is white men. So I do believe that had we gotten a higher percentage, we would have seen higher rates of people saying, no, everything's fine. Because if you are a white man, it feels fine. I know this because I am married to a white man and he feels fine, right? It doesn't really happen to him, these things that women will talk about and people of color will talk about. People don't shush him. They don't tell him to smile more. They don't ask him to do these different things. And he doesn't ever have to really think about who is in the room with him. But women do, people of color do, people of all kinds of different backgrounds have to think about those things, and then they have to check themselves. And so what I'm asking us to do, and Randy, I'm looking to you and to Mary, because I know that you guys can make this happen. I am looking to make it better for the people that work for us, and therefore better for the people of this community, that they don't have to think so hard about the rooms that they find themselves in. And they are not constantly told, no, we are welcoming, and therefore it is so. That's it for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Canty. Trustee Scaletta.
Thank you, Mayor. You know what? I'm going to wait until after we've heard from the other people that are on the Zoom. A lot of my questions have been answered by my colleagues, and I want to give an opportunity for the people that are on the Zoom call, because I'll have an opportunity after they speak out to ask a few more questions. So I'll reserve my time until after. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Trustee Scaletta. Anything else from the board before we go to the audience? All right, seeing none, we will then go to the audience. And you're just reminded of the 3-minute time limit that we do try to follow. We do have 55 people on the call. I only have 2 hands up right now, but we will try to keep everyone within the time limit if we can. The other thing is that we did receive some comments in advance, and rather than read those at the beginning, Deputy Clerk Peterson, we'd like to do that at the end this time and give preference to the people who are actually with us live. So just remind me if I forget that we need to read those into the record as well. So with that, we will go to the audience, and the first up is Bob Freud. Bob?
Hi, can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, well, I have a short 30-second statement, and I want to thank everybody for allowing us to talk. We are Bob and Sandy Freud. We are retired and have lived in Arlington Heights for 31 years and have also both worked in the village at various times. We are concerned about the consultant report's emphasis on a so-called strategic approach to diversity. We are the children and grandchildren of immigrants who had no problems working hard to support their families and assimilating into their communities. We also believe that there are enough laws on the books to make sure that discrimination does not take place. Thus, there is no need for government to micromanage human activities and interactions through social engineering. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. and Mrs. Freud. Next is Michael Singer.
Good evening, Mayor Hayes, Manager Ruckless, and Board of Trustees. My name is Michael Singer. I've been a resident of Arlington Heights for well over 30 years. I am familiar with board meetings. I have attended some of them. I've attended committee meetings, and it's my opinion that you get out of something what you put in. And sometimes the only time you have a large number of people attending board meetings is when you run into something like NIMBY. That gets people's interest and they show up in numbers. This, I think, is a critical area. I've addressed it with Chief Picara before, and it seems that one of the problems is before you can hire somebody of a diverse background, you have to have an applicant. And I see that as a difficulty in implementing these recommendations that Kaleidoscope has made. And while it's a well done report, very comprehensive, I have to come back to the implementation part of it, which means how do you get to those applicants? Even if you have applicants that could have an interest, you have a distancing problem. Many of those same people that the group is recommending you hire for diversity purposes are not living within walking distance of the village. And while you might think we have good transportation capabilities with Metro right in your backyard, the reality of it is not everybody has access to Metro, and not everybody's going to want to spend the money or the time to communicate from some of these areas that they actually live in. And I think that poses a problem in getting to the diversity part of it. The only thing I can see is perhaps offering in some of these ads for the applicants some incentive by helping cover costs of commuting, for instance. Or if you have somebody that is actually living in the village that's already gainfully employed, perhaps advertising that you'll pay them $5,000 to $10,000 more than whatever they're currently earning. And then perhaps you would be able to have a viable applicant. Because again, it's not just the applicant. The applicant has to be qualified for the job that they're seeking. And that's, I think, particularly clear with the police department. I have a very small firm, and hiring diverse individuals is difficult. I happen to have someone that is diverse in my firm, but I got him through word of mouth. You know, we contacted a client and said, hey, do you know anybody who's looking for a job? And yeah, we got somebody, and we're gonna keep her. We also had a good applicant come off of Indeed, I believe it was. And again, this was a person of color, good candidate, well, you know, had the schooling that we needed, but I believe that what she wanted was to work from home.
Mr. Singer, if I could ask you to wrap up.
Okay, and we couldn't offer him that. But I appreciate the opportunity to address you as a group in this matter, and I look forward to addressing you again at some point in time. So you have a very nice evening.
All right, thanks for your input. And next is Ms. Thomas. And Ms. Thomas, if you just identify your full name, if you would.
Hi, I'm Karen Thomas. I'm a resident of Arlington Heights. I also grew up here, so 35 plus years I've been here. And so I have two questions kind of combined. The big question is about budget. And I understand that budget is a real issue, and I know that it's tight. And I understand that. It was made very clear at the beginning of this meeting that there would be no really extra budget for these efforts. And so my question is, as I look through the recommendations, a handful of recommendations I feel take money, like recommendation 2, recommendation 12, 13, 14, 15, and also a part in the last paragraph of the diversity, equity, inclusion statement clearly references training, and that takes a budget, and it takes qualified people to do it, and to do it well. And so I'm just wondering if someone could speak on that in terms of how we'll move forward. And Randy, I know you mentioned kind of how you'd hit some of these in your breakdown, and some of it was done like internally. But my question is, internally, we already know that it's not super diverse, right? This is a fact. I'm just wondering how those things will happen internally and correctly to move forward. One, it hasn't happened yet. And two, without that knowledge and that relearning and some of that guidance, I'm just curious on how that will happen and be really effective.
Well, Karen, let me just address your first question because it related to my introductory comments about cost of these recommendations. And I didn't say that we wouldn't be willing to spend money. I said, and I still believe, that the majority of these recommendations don't come associated with a big cost. And so certainly there is money involved in some of these recommendations, but not exorbitant costs. And I think it's something that we could fit within the budget. So I'm not saying that we're not willing to spend money on this effort. That's not what I said at all.
Thank
Mr.
you for
Eckles.
clarifying that. I really appreciate that. And that is good to hear that we feel like some of this can fit into the budget. So thank you for clarifying.
Right, and Mr. Eckles, do you want to follow up?
Yeah, just to reiterate, we do, this is kind of would involve the prioritization of things that we already have funded. We do have training budgets in our departments. We do have partnerships and agencies with which that we do business that can help us in these areas. I think a lot of it is a question of prioritization, and there are some of these items that will cost money that we don't currently have budgeted, but we can reallocate things. But to dovetail the mayor's point, when we got this report, my first reaction wasn't, my gosh, this is great, but we can't afford any of this. This is the type of thing that, if we rethink how we do things and do it over time, we think these recommendations are generally very doable and within our means. And I think that's the sentiment that we have at this point.
Right, thanks for your comments, Karen.
Thank you.
Next is Marianne Zalewski.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hi, thank you, Mayor Hayes and all the trustees. I've been a resident here for about 8 years now. I am a mother of a 2- and 4-year-old, and I'm very happy that our town has finally decided to look at the DEI and what types of things we can be doing as a community to implement that into our community more. But one thing and I know that you guys are not the school district themselves, but one thing I'm concerned about as a parent is that we're not hearing from a lot of the residents of a certain population in our community, and I'm concerned moving forward. How are we going to address the needs of the people in the community that maybe have been affected negatively through this pandemic? For example, there are a majority of the people in our community that have been able to comfortably work from home. They've been able to comfortably learn from home. What about the people in our community that haven't? We're not hearing from them. And, Trustee Canty was talking about this, but like the vocal minority in our community, they're not here. You're not hearing from them. You're not hearing some of the negative repercussions that our community has had through this pandemic. And I'm just wondering, if we want to remain a destination for other people with children, we need to have a plan for parents in schooling, right? One of the reasons I moved here was because of the schools in the school district. And I would have to say, I don't know, I know Mayor Hayes, I know people that have reached out to you and maybe haven't heard back from you directly, so maybe you can speak to that. But I'm wondering, as a board, my question is, are you paying attention to what's going on in the school district? Are you concerned about the long-term effects of how this pandemic may have affected our community in terms of like being a destination for families that want to move here, for schools or things like that? Because I think this is, again, we're not hearing from everybody. We hear from the people that it's going really well for, but we're not hearing from the vocal minority. So I guess my question is, are you paying attention? Are you in contact with the school districts regularly? And what are you guys going to do to address maybe some of the negative, the reputation that our community is currently getting regarding the school districts here?
Well, Marianne, I'm not quite sure I understand your question. You're saying negative reputation for the schools because of their policies of not allowing the kids to come back to school? I'm not sure what school issue you're actually
Correct.
raising.
Yeah, so like there's no, for example, next year, my daughter is supposed to be enrolled at one of the district schools. I'm not doing it until I know that these school districts can be open, right? And I'm actually now looking at like moving out of this city, and I'm wondering, and I'm not alone. There's other people also that are just like, is this going to continue? And I don't know. I don't know if you guys are paying attention or not, but you know, those of us with young kids, we're thinking about leaving entirely. And if you guys want people to stay here, right, and you want to continue Arlington Heights being like the beautiful town that it has been, you know, what are we going to do as a community to try to make sure that we can move forward in a way that it still is attracting people? And secondly, you know, how we're not hearing from, I mean, Miss Canty was saying it herself, but like, we're not hearing from the vocal minority. We're not hearing from some of the parents and children who this pandemic has affected probably the most.
Okay, Marianne, let me just address I think I understand. Unfortunately, this is a much larger issue than we're dealing with tonight. And you raised the concern that I have received a lot of questions or requests to get involved with the school district. And I certainly have, and you know, received those questions and requests. And I've told people, I've told the, you know, the parents that are rightfully concerned about these issues that unfortunately I can't get involved. But I have to trust the elected representatives of those school boards that they are going to do the right thing based on all available information to them. And so, you know, again, the mayor only has so much authority. And I don't have anything to do with the schools, don't have anything to do with the park district, but they have their own elected representatives and staff members that are charged with making these decisions based on, again, all scientific, medical, legal information available to them. And that's what I've told everybody that's reached out to me. I'm very sympathetic of these issues, Marianne. I've got 2 grandkids. One was supposed to start first grade this year. And I'm very concerned about his social, you know, how this is going to affect him socially by not being in class with his friends. And so these are very serious issues, and I take them very seriously, I do. But, you know, we have to trust the people that are elected to make those decisions. So that's the best I can tell you right now, Marianne.
Yeah, I appreciate your response. I wanted to know to what extent the trustees are paying attention to what's going on in our community and whether we really are hearing from the vocal minority. So.
Well, I have heard from many parents, as I've told you, and I'm sure the other board members have as well. So thank you for your comments. Next is Heidi Graham.
Good evening, Mayor Hayes, Randy, and board members, and Tanya and Jesse. Thank you so much for being here tonight. Heidi Graham, resident of Arlington Heights, as well as the president of the League of Women Voters of Arlington Heights, Mount Prospect, and Buffalo Grove. I have 2 questions, and so rather than asking them back to back, I'd like to ask my question, have you answer it, and then ask you to come back to me. The first question is, you know, the kaleidoscope, Tanya spoke very clearly on the fact that the community most interacts with our police and fire. And my question is, being that that is the case, why were they excluded from the report and from the scope?
I can say that they were not. They were police and fire employees were included in the study, same as everybody else, and they were addressed in the study, you know, probably more than any other single department.
Okay, but I read this study and it quite clearly states that the police and fire were not part of the original scope.
No, police and fire employees were absolutely part of the scope. I'm not sure where you would have seen that.
Okay, my next question is to the point that I believe you made, Randy, about quote unquote staying in lanes. And that is about intersectionality. You know, we talk right now about our intersectionality. I'm white, I'm female, I'm middle-aged, right? All of my intersectionality. I don't believe, it doesn't seem to me that we can address this problem if we are only looking at it in a silo. So am I to understand that what I want to understand is that the village board and the village leaders will be addressing this issue across all of its scope?
What I can say about that is, in Illinois, we have, as Tanya pointed out, a very Byzantine system of local government. And, if you were in Virginia or Texas or a lot of other places, the mayor and the village board oversee parks, schools, all of those items, and we do not. And the reason I brought that up was to make the point that in order to address community-wide issues, we really need to partner with the school district, the park district, the library, other entities in order to do this right. Because if we formed a work group, whatever you want to call it, and they started to have a bunch of recommendations on those items, it doesn't really matter because the village doesn't have authority over those items. And my point was that in order to do this right, we really need to engage the leadership of all of the entities. And then along with that, take advantage of the unique capabilities of these entities to outreach to different groups that maybe we can't. And while you can look at it two ways, one, we can focus on our specific areas of responsibility and make sure those are addressed for sure. But also we need to make sure that we're doing so collaboratively with the other agencies so that they can address their areas of expertise. And I can tell you that I've spoken with over the past several months. I get together virtually with the superintendents, the school district of the school districts, the park district, and library director, and we talk about these issues routinely. And there's very much an interest in working collaboratively on these issues to a greater extent than we are now. And so I think we can get there, but I think there are some inherent limitations. That the village board, the village government is not a catch-all for all government activities. We have a scope of services just like the school district does or the park district does.
Correct, but I just want to be able to hold the board and the village accountable, because on the one hand, Randy, I'm hearing you say that you want to work collaboratively and in fact are working collaboratively by having regular meetings with the superintendents. But on the other hand, I've heard tonight board members say they can't have anything to do with these other elected officials. So is it only at the employee level, the manager level, that there will be collaboration, or will there be collaboration across both the elected positions as well as the paid positions?
Yeah, Heidi, let me just address that. And I think maybe you were referring to my comments that I just made to Ms. Zalewski. I mean, I can't get involved in the decisions that a school board makes, but I've certainly talked to Dr. Bine and other school board members. And we just had a joint meeting with the park district. We just had a joint meeting with the library board of commissioners. And so we regularly talk to these other elected officials, but they are charged with making their own decisions. And it's not right for us to cross boundaries. And so, we have to trust that they're going to make the right decisions based on all information available to them. But we are certainly reaching out to other elected representatives. We're very proud of the established relationships we have with other local governmental bodies. and we continue to work with them on a regular basis throughout each year.
Well, I love hearing
Heidi-
that. My next question would be then,
Heidi,
are
last
these,
Heidi,
are these
Heidi,
meetings
Heidi.
open to the public?
Absolutely,
Okay, great.
absolutely. And Heidi, is that your last question?
Well, I was hoping to ask if the commissions had been audited.
You're talking the appointed boards and commissions in the village?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
That was not part of this scope, but certainly something that we can do is part of our ongoing work.
Thank you, Randy. And thank you for your time. I appreciate it. I know I've gone over my allotted time.
Right, thank you, Ms. Graham. Next is Austin Medrich.
Good evening, board, mayor. Very much appreciate your time. I just wanted to make a comment or two as a newer resident of Arlington Heights, but hopefully a longtime resident of Arlington Heights. I just wanted to make the point that these decisions that you're making aren't just for now. I think a lot of times in our discussion following diversity, equity, and inclusion conversations across the country, we feel it's imperative to respond immediately to try and focus and remedy a problem that's arisen when we're talking obviously about systemic things. And so the decisions that you make tonight and going forward, I think are very important because they impact the future and the future generations of this village. And so I would just encourage you guys to keep that in mind, especially as we, as was noted in the report, have increasingly diverse populations in the village that will only likely increase given the demographic trends of this country. And so in talking about actionable things, you know, I would certainly be in favor, and I know others would be, of not an ad hoc committee, but a permanent committee for diversity, equity, and inclusion to ensure that this is an ongoing and continuous, you know, priority for the village. And that really makes a statement for anybody my age, under 30, or, you know, the new families that might be looking to get out of the city or move to a place with that's just an awesome village, awesome school districts, everything else. These things really do matter for the younger generations. And I would just encourage you to keep that in mind going forward. Thank you, everybody, for your time.
Thank you, Austin. Next is George Mato. George?
Thank you, Mayor Hayes. I'm actually thrilled to hear the discussion tonight. And as I said in our age-friendly meeting last week, Kaleidoscope really represents something, the process that we were advocating. I'm chairperson of that initiative. Some other thoughts I've mentioned before the board, that the times they are changing. I'm not going to sing it this time, but it's absolutely true. I too am a long-term resident of Arlington Heights, 43 years. I am the grandson of Italian immigrants. I have been incredibly privileged. I agree with Trustee Canty about problems other people have. Yes, my ancestors met some roadblocks, but they weren't of a different color. They weren't Black. And I think that I called it the elephant in the room at the town hall, the DEI town hall, but I think that this is the elephant in the room. The elephant in the room is this problem of racism, is the problem of NIMBY, is the problem of wanting to maintain the status quo, but unfortunately, history never looks kindly in the long run on people who just want to maintain the status quo. So what I would say here, obviously there are differences of opinion, so we really do have to open up some discussions. I think a task force or a commission, whether it be ad hoc or permanent, has to be done. We have to start conversations or we are never going to address this issue. And I would strongly recommend, and we've recommended in the past, that a task force or a commission or something, and would not be social engineering. It would be recognition that we have a problem and we want to do our best to try to address it. And I think this is a great first step. Thank you.
Thank you, George. Next is Jerry Wasserman. You're still on mute, Jerry. Jerry, you're on mute.
Sorry about that.
Okay.
Yeah, Jerry Wasserman from Reclaim Northwest Suburbs. I can't imagine going forward not having a permanent DEI committee or commission. I just think there's a lot on the table here. And I think it's, like you said, it's going to take time to go through this process. And I think everybody would benefit from having a long-term commission on this. Secondly, I have a few, second, third, and fourth, I have a few questions. Regarding, I know I read the report and there was a comment by Kaleidoscope about the police having a more transparent process to mediate claims of police misconduct and more explanation of the internal affairs process is needed. I don't know if that was addressed by Randy or anybody else tonight, if that is going to be further looked into. And then I have another question of why racial hiring quotas aren't going to be put in place, the reasoning behind that. I know there's pros and cons to it. And I know they talk about benchmarks in the report. What does that exactly mean? What are benchmarks? What would that look like? And lastly, even I probably have 10 more questions, but I know I'm limited in time. What can we do to get more Black-owned businesses in town? I didn't even realize that there aren't any right now, I guess. You know, one of the trustees mentioned that. Is included in this the Chamber of Commerce? I'm not hearing, maybe I missed that. Maybe they could be more active in getting more Black-owned businesses to town. I didn't hear them brought up or in the report anywhere, but they should be part of it too, I would imagine. Some sort of incentives to get more Black-owned businesses coming to town. So a few questions there, if you could address those.
Jerry, just one question for you. You mentioned you're with Reclaim Northwest. Do you also live in Arlington Heights?
No, I'm part of a group, Reclaim Northwest Suburbs, and our members are from all over, many members from Arlington Heights.
But just to confirm, you don't live in Arlington Heights, do you?
No, these are just, I run a group and with fellow members that are from Arlington Heights, and we come up with questions as a group and we present them as a group, and I'm just the spokesperson for the group.
Okay, Randy, can you address any of those? You're on mute, Randy.
That was bound to happen. We do hope, I know we do have Black-owned businesses in the community. I think Trustee Canty was referring to Black-owned restaurants in particular. The Chamber of Commerce did form a DEI committee this past year, and there were diverse business owners involved in that process. So I know that that's some work that's underway. In terms of some of the other issues, we absolutely are going to be looking at how to make any complaint process that we have for police and other departments more transparent. That's one of the things I think we can do. There are some very specific rules for complaints filed against police officers under state law. And the police officers have certain rights when there's a complaint and how that has to be followed up. And so obviously we want to give everyone their rights that are due, but there's no reason we can't make the process as clear as possible and more available on our website than it is perhaps today. In terms of quotas, you know, that's something that I think from our standpoint, philosophically, we always have looked at hiring the best possible candidate. And one of the challenges that we have is that we don't get as many candidates that are of people of color, people of minority status, in some cases female as we would like. We're very confident in our processes that if we get more candidates of that nature, we will in turn have more employees, because we believe that our process works and is consistent with all best practices. But what we know we do need to do more of is do more outreach for two different areas and do recruitment in different ways to make sure that we're getting more people in, and making sure that folks that may not see themselves represented know that they're welcome in our organization, and that in fact we think that they would be assets to our organization because they may not be represented today if they're qualified otherwise. But hopefully that answers your questions, but that's kind of our standpoint on this today.
All right, thank you, Mr. Ecklaus. Trustee Scaletta, did you have a comment? We still have I have to go back for very quickly.
Oh, I thought you'd gone through everybody who had their hand.
Well, Ms. Graham and Ms. Thomas, you have your hands up again. You've already spoken, so I don't normally go back. But if you still have some additional comments or questions, I'll give you 30 seconds. Heidi?
Oh, apologies. Somebody just asked, twice the NIMBY has been mentioned, and I'm going to show my ignorance. Have no idea what that is.
Not in my backyard.
Oh, I thank you very much.
Okay. And we still have Anola Stoic.
Duh. Hi, I'm Anola Stoic. I've been a resident of Arlington Heights for 37 years. And I had a couple of questions. One, I guess I would address this to Randy. On page 32 of the report, it said participants in both groups raised concerns that the village celebrations, such as holiday lights, landscaping, and decoration, favor Christian denominations and thereby overlooking religious preferences that are not Christian, as well as those who do not participate or engage in religious preferences. My question is, have the participants who commented in the report, and Tanya, maybe this is for you, have these people come to the village with suggestions for additional celebrations representing their religion and ethnicity? And if so, were their proposals rejected by the village? Or I just question why this is part of the report if there haven't been questions and if they haven't been addressed.
I can take a first crack at that. To my knowledge, no. I'm not aware of any group that has come before the village and made a request that's been turned down. Tanya can speak to this as well as I did, but I mean, this was just something that was raised as part of this group. It's not necessarily representative of all people in our community, but Kaleidoscope thought it was noteworthy, and it's something for us to consider. Excuse me. And so, it's something for us to explore further as we do more of our outreach work. I can say that there are non-Christian denominations featured in our holiday lights display at North School Park. Is every single religion represented? No. And is it something we can explore further? That's something that's done jointly with the Park District, certainly. But it's not something where there's been a lot of debate that I'm aware of, or where groups have been turned down, and it's something we certainly can talk to the Park District about and engage in further community discussion on.
And I had a second comment, and I'm sorry I neglected the page number. I think it was around page 16, where they talked about the makeup of the police department in Arlington Heights. And some participant made the comment that there weren't enough policemen that looked like them. And it said, among the community members who experienced an encounter with a police officer, the common sentiment was, I deserve to be stopped and that they were treated fairly and equitably. At the same time, some community members also noted concerns that neither they nor their children see police and fire employees who look like them. Did these people that commented, or the persons who said they had been stopped and treated equitably, did they feel that they would have had a different result had the officer looked like them? Again, I just don't understand why this was included in the report when it didn't say anything one way or the other.
You want to take that one, Tanya?
Sure, I'm happy to. So that's a great question. So when we collected the data from the community members and we had those listening groups and the town hall to a lesser extent, we did not retain any information about who attended or what groups they belonged to. And to be very honest with you, we weren't in a position to make any assessments or assumptions about why they were reporting certain types of things and why they weren't. And so our responsibility to the community and our responsibility to the village was to report on those issues that seem to have importance to the community members. I hope that helps maybe explain what the process was, but I cannot connect at this point a particular comment that someone made or any group of people made to a particular incident or person. And that was done on purpose in order to prevent the, protect rather the privacy and confidentiality of those who were willing to share their experiences with us.
Thank you.
Thanks for your questions and comments, Enola. And the last hand that I have up is Lori Taylor. Lori.
Hi, hopefully you can hear me now.
Yes.
Good. I want to first say thank you all, trustees, Randy, Kaleidoscope Group, for what you guys done. I know that I speak for many residents when I say we're always interested in making our community better. Now, just for people, in case people don't know this, but Governor Pritzker just signed that bill HB 3653 that relates to the police department. So I'm sure that some of the recommendations regarding the police department on the report are going to have to change too because of things that are brought into that bill. But I just have one question because I'm trying to read through this and I'm interpreting, what's a recommendation, what's a consideration. I have a question probably for Tanya. Recommendation number 5. It says that you want to establish expected and socially appropriate behaviors and norms for the community. Could you elaborate that a little bit, please? Why was that written?
So thank you for the question, Lori. I appreciate you asking that. So the question or that recommendation is related specifically to the feasibility of anti-bias policy or that body of policymaking that the board may wish to engage in related to the phenomenon of profiling by proxy specifically. So what we're recommending is that as they explore the possibility of creating this body of policy and as they craft that policy, if that's the right thing for the board to do, then we highly recommend that they consult with the businesses, the residents, and the community members in Arlington Heights to set parameters around what those behaviors are that are considered socially appropriate. Does that help? So we're not.
It does, but I have a problem again with what you just said, where the village can set parameters for the residents. I'm a resident. I live here. And that sort of is, I'm not an employee of the village.
No, I understand.
I'm trying to grasp at.
Yeah, let me explain a little bit more and connect it more to that profiling by proxy phenomenon. So that's what happens when people call for police assistance when there actually isn't a crime or a wrong being done. But the caller is telling the police that they are at risk or that they're in harm's way as a result of an interaction or an observation with somebody that they might not recognize. Very often across the country, those interactions are viewed as being and are later determined to be related to race. And so what we're recommending is that the board and the village look at building policy around the idea that calling for police and requesting service when there's not a crime that's happening or you're not in imminent danger could be an area for them to explore. Does that help clarify?
Can I jump in on that one too, Tanya?
Please.
You know,
Yeah.
I think, Lori, I think what you're, if I hear you right, you know, the issue you have with that recommendation is kind of the phrase establishing expected and socially appropriate behaviors and norms for the community in particular. Is that correct?
Yeah.
What I would say is, I mean, I hear what you're saying, but I mean, I think the village does this all the time. All the time. You know, for example, we tell people.
Randy, could you hold on for 1 second?
Yeah.
Lori, can I ask you to mute yourself? I think we hear some rants on in the background.
Yes, you do. Sorry.
What I was going to say is,
go ahead, Randy.
the village does that all the time. You know, for example, we encourage people to call 911 when they have a problem. We can't make them call 911. They could go, and sometimes they don't. Sometimes they want to call the front desk. Sometimes they come up to the front desk. Sometimes they don't even call us at all, and they just post on social media that someone's outside my door and I'm scared. But what we're trying to do, we're not saying that we're looking to enforce, yes, you know, expected and socially appropriate behaviors. We're just saying that we kind of help people understand what the village would like to see and expect from them. You know, the whole campaign of if you see something, say something is another example of this. And so I think we do this all the time. And what Kaleidoscope was getting at was just to kind of recast that in a slightly different way. I think it's a nuanced change, but it isn't. You know, but I understand what you're saying. That phrase, the way it was written, you know, I could see why it would raise your eyebrows.
Okay, Lori, hopefully that addressed your question, and we thank you for your comments. Those are all the hands that I see up at this time. We did have some comments submitted in advance. I want to go back to those. Kim, if you could not read the comment or the question, whatever it was, from Melissa Kayer tonight, because it's not relevant to this agenda item. And
Okay.
Melissa, I know you're on the call, and so we'll defer that into our meeting this coming Monday night. And so, Kim, if you just read the other two into the record.
Sure. So the first one I have is from Mary Jacks. She's an Arlington Heights resident. And she has several questions. Do you want me to read the question and then?
Yeah, read the whole thing.
Read the whole thing? Okay.
Yep.
Okay. I can agree with casting a wide net to find a variety of candidates for positions in the village. Questions. Recommendation 2/3. Precisely, how is designating diversity and inclusion as a management and employee performance metric measured? Have these measurements been developed elsewhere? Can Kaleidoscope give examples? Page 13. Younger generations of workers are likely more attuned to inclusion in the workplace, and millennial workers are more likely to reject racism and other isms. What is this assumption based on? There is an opportunity to develop a recruitment and retention strategy for millennial and younger generation employees. Will age be a factor in hiring by the village? Page 15. For the purpose of creating an inclusive workforce, a broad definition of diversity should include birth sex, gender identity, gender orientation, ability, age, culture, ideological perspectives, and other potential factors. Is this legal in hiring practice? What other potential factors?
Okay, Kim, we'll stop you there. I know you got one more, but Tanya or Randy, if you could address the items that were not previously addressed tonight.
I can take that first one, Tanya, if you want to take the next two, if that's okay. I can tell you, while I know there's a lot of different ways that designating diversity and inclusion as a management and employee metric is measured, and we're going to be doing research on that in terms of some direct ways. Some of the things that we can do, for example, our leadership team that we've already talked about very easily is our leadership team is reviewed on a series of factors such as customer service, fiscal responsibility, management, leadership, et cetera. And this could be another factor that's added and defined. And that's kind of a more qualitative way that it's done. And it's clear, you send a message to your team, your leadership, that these are qualities that we are put first and foremost. And we expect them to complete projects, and some of their goals will relate to these values. There's other things we can look at as well, and we don't have to go into the details of them, but I don't know if you want to talk about some of on the other two questions, Tanya.
Sure, I'm happy to. So one of the questions was about younger generations of workers and how they're attuned to inclusion in the workplace that might be differently from older generations of workers. And I just wanted to mention that there's a good amount of published research about that relationship between age and the perceptions of diversity and inclusion. And I think I've mentioned earlier today too that the Kaleidoscope Group also performs a number of those organizational assessments, just like we did with the Village of Arlington Heights. And so we see trends in the data in those ways too. So older generations of workers generally are, and by older generations of workers, I'm including myself in that group, those would be the silent generation and baby boom generation and even Generation X that tend to be a little bit more tolerant of behaviors than younger generations of workers, being millennials and Generation Z, who are much more adept at listening to and hearing those differences about what's acceptable in the workplace and what's not. So there's a good amount of published research there. And then the other question I think was about whether, just building off of that, about millennial and younger generations of employees and whether age is or will be a factor in hiring by the village. What the Kaleidoscope Group has recommended is that wide net approach to attracting talent. And so being inclusive and creating measures or processes that allow the village to attract a large and diverse population of people that includes young generations, older generations ranging from Generation Z to to millennials, to Generation X and beyond.
All right, thanks, Tanya. Kim, you want to read the other one?
Sure. This, let me see who this one is from. The gentleman who sent this comment, his name is Steve Swerdesky. I don't know where he lives, but his question is, it would please me if Kaleidoscope would address the statement pertaining to the DEIO report under the heading Public Safety and Law Enforcement, specifically the section beginning at the bottom of page 16 and continues into page 17. Interest and concern regarding law enforcement and fire service. Specifically, a common criticism the community expressed about the village is that the police department demographics do not represent the demographics of the community. We must emphasize that community members did not share specific complaints about police officer conduct or the police department in terms of service or the nature of their encounters with members of the police department. In fact, among those community members who experienced encounters with a police officer, the common sentiment was, "I deserve to be stopped," and that they were treated fairly and equitably. At the same time, some community members also noted concerns that neither they nor their children see police or fire department employees who look like them. As a consequence, a perception exists that public safety services do not represent the entire community. My question is, why are we so focused upon color rather than skill and capability when it comes to providing safety in our community? especially since the services being provided are satisfactory based upon the published results of the survey. If members of the community are judging qualifications solely upon a visual litmus test, which seems discriminatory, why are we not receiving strong criticism from our Hispanic, Latino, and Asian community members? Or are we? I'd like to understand the demographics of the common criticism sources, because from what I have been reading in local newspaper, the voices complaining about lack of diversity are not originating from those community members. I am confused.
All right, thanks, Kim. We've addressed some of this already, I know, in talking about the fact that we won't be establishing any diversity hiring quotas, but Tanya or Randy, do you have anything else to say about these issues?
So maybe I can offer some clarification about how we defined common criticism. And so when we said that there was a common criticism, it meant that we heard it in at least both of the listening sessions. Or we heard comments or concerns in both of the listening sessions raised by 3 or more people in each. And so when it became a topic of conversation that community members engaged in, we felt that it was our responsibility and obligation to report that to you, the board, and to the village in the report. However, we do not know the race, gender, necessarily ethnicity, religion, faith, and I can't speak to what the demographic, the characteristics were of the people who participated in those conversations. We didn't collect or retain any information related to that.
Okay, thank you. Randy, anything else?
No, I was just going to say that, I think we all acknowledge, especially when you look nationwide, that these issues are real. And the only way for us to know whether these things are happening with our own police department is to look and to ask. And, I think that's how I would respond to the gentleman's question is, I think that, we're looking at national trends and seeing as to whether they're applying at the local level. And we look at traffic stop data. That's something we're mandated to take a look at. And whenever we get those, we do pretty well in the Arlington Heights Police Department. And we're very proud of that. And as Trustee Canty said, we do a lot of training and we're very picky with who we hire because we want to get people that are entering law enforcement for the right reasons. And, and we give them the tools to do the job the right way. But the only way we can stay that way is to always ask these questions and to always look. And I don't think we should be afraid to ask those questions, I guess would be my response.
Okay, thanks, Randy. Melissa Kayer, I see you have your hand up. Do you have a comment or a question on the DEI report? Go ahead, Melissa. Melissa, you're still on mute.
Okay, hello.
Okay, we got you.
Yeah, my comment had to do with encouraging people to go to local government meetings. So that has to do with diversity.
Well, yeah, but then you were talking about the property tax bill.
Yeah,
which you've raised
that's a way to encourage people to go to public meetings by putting the website address of the taxing bodies on the property tax bill.
Okay, thanks, Melissa.
Well, you could read the whole email that I sent.
Melissa, we've addressed this before.
Okay, how inclusive of you. Thank you.
Kim, why don't you read it into the record, please?
Okay. This is from Melissa Kayer. Attend local government meetings. The boards and commissions are made up of volunteers. The elected and or appointed people in many instances do not get paid for their time and attention. The taxing bodies are listed on the property tax bill, and any property tax bill can be assessed on the cookcountytreasurer.com website. Along with the name of the taxing bodies, I hope Cook County will put the taxing bodies website address on the property tax bill. If there was an associated website address on the property tax bill, then it would be easier for people to look at the local government information instead of performing a search engine request to get the information.
Okay, thank you, Kim. And thank you, Melissa. All right, we'll then close the public comment period. I see no other hands up, and go back to the village board for further discussion with the reminder that we do have a suggested motion to consider tonight regarding the policy statement. And so trustee Scaletta.
Thank you, Mayor. You know what, and thank you to Kaleidoscope, to Randy, Mary, the other department heads, and the staff, even the staff that, that went out of their way to make sure that they filled out that survey, and also the community. I mean, there's definitely been an outreach of people who are supportive of us having further dialogue, while there's other people who are asking us questions of whether we should. I think it's clear that we should continue to have this dialogue. It's one of the goals of this board, and I think it's important. Kaleidoscope put together a thorough and detailed report. I reviewed it several times, just making sure that I caught every part of it, because it was very detailed, and the recommendations can be a little bit complicated. And I was trying to envision what those recommendations would look like, and how we would execute them as a board, of kind of coming up with direction for the village manager. I also viewed the Zoom on the Facebook of the League of Women Voters. I found that very interesting. I don't know that that we can solve all the problems that I heard on the Zoom call, but I think that as a board, we can make efforts to try and make things better, so that people feel more welcomed in the village. I'm not sure what all those things are, but I think that after reviewing the report, that there are things that we can do, because I think small gestures go a long way. I attended a pretty diverse high school in Chicago, and I think that I benefited from that, or not think, I know I benefited from that diversity. So I think that diversity is a good thing. I don't know that we necessarily need to be advertising that we want to be more diverse, but I think that we should embrace the diversity that we have, and let people know that there is nothing wrong with diversity, and that diversity shouldn't be kind of like a bad word. I think that diversity is a good word, and I think that diversity is more than just black and white and brown, as we've discussed here tonight. I think that when I was listening to, I mean, I have read so much and listened to so much over these past months, and I think that when I hear things, when I hear people say that we didn't, as a village board, condemn hateful acts, whether it be racist graffiti or the destruction of banners or other efforts by some individuals. I'll call them cowards because we don't know who they are. In one instance, we do know who they are because they're from a neighboring suburb. But regardless, I don't know how much more the village board could condemn something. We spoke out. The mayor spoke out on our behalf. The village manager spoke out. We all spoke out as individuals. So sometimes I don't think that people necessarily want to hear that we can't satisfy everybody. And I don't think that we're going to be able to satisfy everybody with the work that we're going to do going forward. But I want to make a good faith effort that we do try and satisfy the majority, because everything that we do as a board, we do to benefit the majority of the village. And I think that ultimately we will do good work and that will benefit the majority. I'm eager to see the results of the audit of the commissions, because I would say in the past 6-7 years, the mayor has done an incredible job of finding candidates, and sometimes it's because of referrals by board members, by my colleagues. But he has definitely made our boards more diverse. So I have to give credit where credit is due. I have a question for Randy, and then I have a question for Tanya, or I guess they're both for Tanya. Tanya, with 25%, that's over 100 employees that responded, correct?
That is correct. Yes.
Okay. And I think when we look at it by percentage, it doesn't sound like a significant number. You're telling us it is, number one, but number two, still over 100 employees responded to the survey. So when I think about 100 bodies of 100 people, that's more that was that attended this meeting and even on this panel. So that was a pretty good number. The other question I had for was, can you tell me what cultural competency training would look like? I'm not getting it, because it sounds like it's really, really not intense in the fact that people wouldn't be able to understand it, but intense that there's so many different cultures out there. I mean, so give me a little bit.
Yeah. So, one of an experience that I had a long time ago, so not related to Arlington Heights, was I was working with somebody who actually was running an animal shelter. And he said one of the most important things that he ever learned was he was trying to get his employees engaged. And he kept thinking, how am I going to get people engaged? And, they're not coming to these things. I keep scheduling meetings. They're not showing up. I schedule activities. They don't come. And he said he finally understood that his workforce was 75% Hispanic, traditional Mexican-American families. And when he made an activity to engage the workforce that involved bringing their families together, then he was able to make that connection. And that was a really impactful thing for me to hear that story from him. And this was a number of years ago. So one of the things that we find when we work with people is that they're really interested. They really want to know. Implicit bias training is important. Understanding your bias, understanding where it comes from, how to manage it, really important. But to do a deep dive into really looking at what the communities are and what the demographics of your communities are and the population of Arlington Heights, and then providing some training about that population. For example, one of the things we learned in Arlington Heights is that you've got a lot of people who are immigrants that aren't necessarily defined as Black, white, Hispanic, old, young, able, disabled, but they fit around a cult. There's a culture that brings them together. So understanding what that culture is and providing some clues and knowledge to the workforce really helps them engage more closely with that culture. Does that help? So it's different from implicit bias. It's really related to what are the needs in the population and the people who live in Arlington Heights.
I mean, it's a good example. I guess I'll wait to hear more from Randy, because in a future meeting, because it has to be more than just those, and I'm not minimizing what you're saying, but like those anecdotes. And so I think that there's got to be a lot more, but there's just so many different cultures that I'm just kind of eager to learn more about that. So thank you for clarifying it a little bit for me. I appreciate that. And when we talk about, Randy, when you talked about biases, biases against and biases towards, it reminds me that, we all kind of have biases towards, because that's kind of how we have our friends. We socialize with people that are generally like-minded. And so it's interesting, because when people have their negative biases are the ones that we're trying to overcome. It's the positive ones where, we socialize, always with, or I should say always, but for the most part, we socialize with people that that we agree that either, we have something in common. Like you said, you're hiring somebody because they remind you of yourself, or they remind you of another good employee. So I think that biases towards are a good thing, but I can understand how they can negatively impact others when they don't feel like they're included, which is a lot of what we're talking about tonight. You know, I have to say that I concur that the timeline is very aggressive. And I think that if the one thing that you take away from this meeting and all the information that we've received from people that are supportive of the work that we're about to go forward with, is that I think that they want us to get it right rather than rush through it. I think that, you know, I don't want this to drag on forever, because I think that we're always going to kind of be looking at this. But the work that we're going to do in the coming months, you know, that we have to have, make sure that we're showing progress, but at the same time that we're not rushing through it, because I think that it would be a waste and would not be beneficial to our residents or the people who want to feel like they matter and feel like they don't right now. And then, Randy, I wanted to ask you, you mentioned that police officers have certain rights when there's a complaint. Can you expound on that?
Sure. There's the Police Officers' Bill of Rights, which applies to them where if there's a complaint that is, I'm not going to be able to rattle it off at this late hour fluently. And, you know, I don't know if Jesse is more familiar with it given his background as well, but basically if there's a complaint that's filed, you can't really discipline an officer based on an anonymous complaint, number one. There's a whole process where an internal investigation has to occur. They have a right to legal representation through their union. I mean, so there's a lot of different things. And so for us to take a complaint that's something that's actionable, it's not something that's casually done or that we could do with just kind of a chat feature on a website. And so, you know, we want to make sure that if there's, you don't want to give people the impression that they can make a comment like that and it's going to be acted upon, because it can't be unless it follows certain protocols. But that's something that we can better explain on the website, and that's something that you know, can be you know, a more transparent process for sure, and something that we'll be talking about.
So correct me if I'm wrong. Didn't the governor sign away the police officers' rights today by allowing for anonymous complaints?
The new bill changes some aspects of that, but not all of it. How it's all going to actually pan out, we're going to have to wait and see what the regs are written by the state government before we can weigh in on how that changes. But there are changes to how complaint procedures go, as well as a number of other things related to law enforcement in the new act.
Okay, I have more questions about that because I saw a bill that was like 700 pages or something like that. And I can't imagine that they haven't figured all that out if they signed it today, but
it's still, we're also still analyzing it, as is the rest of the industry, in terms of what it's all going to mean. But so it's a moving target. That's a fair point.
Okay. Those are all the questions I have. Mayor, I'm ready to make a motion at the appropriate time.
Okay, Trustee Schwingbeck.
Thank you, Mayor. And I was going to do the exact same thing. I would second the motion when the timing's correct.
Okay, well, John, why don't you go ahead and, unless there, I don't want to have any amendments to the motion. And so are there any comments regarding the position statement before we make a motion on it? I see none.
I believe Mr. Trustee Tinaglia had his hand up.
Yeah, Jim, was it pertaining to the position statement? Okay, why don't you go ahead, Jim?
I was just I want to make a real quick comment about my takeaways for tonight. It can be done after the motion is made. It's fine.
Okay, John, why don't you go ahead with the motion?
Thank you, Mayor. I would move now to recommend that the Village Board of Trustees adopt the draft diversity, equity, and inclusion statement at the next Village Board meeting.
Second.
Motion by Trustee Scaletta, second by Trustee Schwingbeck. Any questions or comments from the board or from the audience? Seeing none, roll call.
Trustee Scaletta,
Yes.
Trustee Schwingbeck,
Yes.
Trustee Baldino,
Yes.
trustee Canty,
Yes.
trustee LaBedz,
Yes.
trustee Padovani,
Yes.
trustee Rosenberg,
Yes.
trustee Tinaglia,
Yes.
President Hayes.
Yes. All right, trustee Tenali.
Thanks, Mary Hayes. I just wanted to one last time thank everybody. Tonight's dialogue was really, really wonderful on so many different levels, internally, externally. Lot was learned, a lot was shared. And so I just wanted to recap some takeaways for me on this. This was a strategic priority for us. We all agreed on it long ago. When we voted on it 3 months ago to have Tanya and Jesse work for us on this, I think my comment then and again today was that this was a marathon. It's not a sprint. And it will be around for a long time. I think we have to probably take care of it like we take care of anything else that we care about, with a little bit of love, a little bit of tenderness, and make sure that what we want at the end is what we get. So for me, watching my kids grow up and go to all the public schools here and the learning that they've gotten with how inclusive and diverse our districts are, I couldn't be happier with how my children have become. And I wish that we could all be like this younger generation. I think that Tanya was referring to. They're much more in tune than my parents were, and maybe even myself. But I think it begins in the home. So I would challenge each of us, whether it's grandchildren or young children of our own, it starts in our home. And I hope that we can do all the right things to help the youngest become the boldest and the most educated in all of these subjects. And I think together with our library, which is an enormous wealth of knowledge there, and no pun intended there, and our school districts, all of our strategic partners that Randy talks about so often, I think together we can make some wonderful progress and some great headway in the coming months, and then in the long term over the next many, many years that this is going to require. So those are my takeaways. I just want to thank everyone for helping educate me tonight, and hopefully all those who were able to stay on and listen the whole time. So thank you.
Jim, I couldn't agree with you more in terms of where the effort really needs to start in the home. And it's all about changing hearts and minds, and it starts with educating our young kids. And so we thank you for those. I at least thank you for those comments. Any other comments from the village board? Trustee LaBedz.
Thank you, Mayor Hayes. I just want to sort of make a comment. A number of people, both tonight and via email, seem to be concerned about the response during the focus groups of people saying they didn't see police officers or others that look like me, and that bothered them. And I think back, I've been around a long time, and there was a long time I didn't see anybody who looked like me either, because there were no women on police forces. There are very, very few. There weren't women on fire departments. There weren't a lot of women on boards and elected commissions. And Arlington Heights in that respect has been better than many of our surrounding communities. But I bring this up because I want to point out that change happens, and over time we will see people that look like us, all of us. And so that makes me very hopeful, because I have seen change. I have to admit, not seeing people that look like me on boards and commissions was one of the driving forces for me to get involved. Not that that's everybody's goal, but it's something that, you know, I just want to point out that the change happens. As Jim said, it's a marathon. But I am so glad that we are all working towards this goal. It's extremely important. It's important to our community. It's important to those people who, you know, didn't, I know it's important to so many people who didn't express concerns either in a focus group or approaching us directly for whatever reason, because it's out there. We know this by speaking with our neighbors and our friends. It's important to so many people. So I want to thank everybody involved. And I, for one, am really looking forward to the progress I know we are going to make and as we move forward. So thank you.
Thanks, Trustee LaBedz. Trustee Canty.
I appreciate that, Robin. I think we come from similar backgrounds in a lot of respects. So I appreciate that. I just also want to add that whether this is a marathon or a sprint, and I think it's probably closer to a marathon, the important thing is to start, though, and I don't think that we can just say start at home. So, you know, I have kids that are young, you know, Trustee Scaletta also has young kids. My kids can make it K through 12 in District 25 and 214 and never have a Black or brown teacher. And that's in our community right now happening today. So I do think it's important that we start this marathon. We've started it tonight. I'm glad to see us take these steps. I'm glad to see us take a leadership role in this. So thank you, Randy, Mary, for everything that you guys are going to be bringing towards us in the meetings to come.
All right, thank you. If nothing else from the board, I just want to again thank the Kaleidoscope Group, and especially Tanya and Jesse, for their great work in giving us this very fair and honest report. I think it's you know, something that we are going to work off of for the weeks and months ahead, and really gives us a great foundation to move forward with this very important endeavor. So Tanya and Jesse, I just want to give you the last word. I don't know if we're going to see you in public again, but I know you've still got a little bit of work to do with us, but any last comments?
We do. You know, it was an honor, and it really was a privilege to have the opportunity to work so closely with the community members and with Manager Recklaus, with Mary Rath, to meet you individually as people, not just as leaders in your community, but understand about the Board of Trustees. Personally, it was a fantastic experience. And as we always say with the Kaleidoscope Group, once you're a client, you're always a client. We're always in the background to help you out as you have questions, if you have things that you want to discuss, if you want to talk more about what that cultural competence training might look like, anything else that comes up. And you're right, this is both a marathon and a little tiny bit a sprint. And one of the things that we always encourage people is to think about this as think about diversity, equity, and inclusion as a butterfly effect, that you'll make tiny, strategic, meaningful, impactful changes that have a much bigger outcome on, you know, down the line. That it's not big change always right up front, but you can have so much impact on the backside if you're careful, strategic, and you plan for it. And I just know that this village has it in them to do it. It really has been an opportunity to work with you that we're grateful for.
Right. Thanks, Tanya. Jesse, go ahead.
Yeah, basically, you know, I sit back and I listen, and I learn so much more by listening. Tanya's talking. I have a lot that's going on through my head. And there are a lot of things that each one of you said, and I would definitely like to speak on it at another time. But I hear you. Even with the Police Bill of Act, there are a lot of things that are changing. We can say one thing today, tomorrow's going to be a different story. So it's a moving target. But again, listening not only to you, but listening to the community, that was my goal, was just to sit back and listen and take it all in. Me and Tanya talk a lot about it. We'll probably have a lot more discussion about it. But again, everything you said, I've seen some different things that I will definitely like to share. Me personally, you know, I experienced everything that everyone talked about. That difference, the colleagues that I came up with, sometimes sitting in a room, just having a diverse thought makes a difference. And just having, and I grew up with a family full of women. And I'm the only male. So, and just sitting back listening, we learn so much. So I sat back, I listened to you, every one of you, and you have a lot to offer and give. I think the community has a lot to offer and give. And I think if everybody listens for a moment, even on the community side, we're going to come up with a great plan. And I think everybody's going to work it out together.
All right, thanks, Jesse. Well said.
Thank you.
All right, if nothing further, then I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So move. Second.
Second.
Motion by trustee Baldino, second by trustee Canty. Roll call.
Trustee Baldino,
Yes.
trustee Canty,
Yes.
trustee LaBedz,
Yes.
trustee Padovani,
Yes.
trustee Rosenberg,
Yes.
trustee Scaletta,
Yes.
trustee Schwingbeck,
Yes.
trustee Tinaglia,
Yes.
President Hayes.
Yes, well, again, thank you all for joining us tonight, including the 23 audience members who are still with us. And so enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you all.
Good night.
Good night, everybody.
Night.
Night, everybody.